Chapter 90. The composure of a queen. When the first roar of thunder occurred, Chu Qingju had started consuming her evening meal at the table. Because she had toured Kuei Yuan Palace in the afternoon, she had taken a nap when she got back. When she woke up, the evening meal had to be delayed. The mushroom slice she had in her chopsticks almost fell to the table. She listened to the roar of wind outside, and put down her chopsticks, frowning as she asked, "It's going to rain?" "It must be." Mu Jin and some of the other palace maids firmly shut the windows in the hall. She walked next to Chu Qingju to gently fan her. There wasn't any sunshine today, but it was humid. "It's not strange that thunder will occur." Chu Qingju nodded. The common people liked to use the days of the 6th month to describe a baby's face. It could be seen just how quickly the summer weather had changed. This moment, it was raining; the next, the sun could come out. She picked up her chopsticks again. When she just picked up a piece of tofu, there was another clap of thunder. But her adaptive abilities were high and she calmly placed the tofu into her mouth. A short time later, she heard the sound of rain falling. From the sound, the rain seemed very heavy. If someone was walking around the outside corridors at the moment, with that wind and the rain, they would definitely become a drowned rat. The hand that Mu Jin was holding a fan with stopped moving. She looked in surprise when the emperor, drenched in water, appeared at the doorway. She retreated to one side and with the other servants, knelt down. "Emperor?" Chu Qingju put down the chopsticks in her hands. She walked quickly to He Hung and touched his soaked clothing. Turning, and from a quick-witted Jin Zhon, she took a cotton cloth, wiping him down as she led him towards the inner room. Such heavy rain. From the front hall to here, it's an entire circle around. "What are you doing coming now?" As she reproached, she reached out to take down the dragon and pearl coronet in He Hung's hair. She took out a clean robe and reached to untie the other's belt. He Hung looked at the palace maids and Taijian that had followed in and used his eyes to order them to leave. He turned, smiling, as he explained, "I just heard the thunder and was worried you would be afraid. Just wanted to take a look, but didn't expect that the rain would come down halfway. With this weather, the rain comes down whenever it wants. There's so many people keeping me company, I won't get scared. Running out like this, it makes people worry." Chu Qingju peeled off his clothing and poked at the muscles on his chest. "How are the servants attending you? Don't they know to have an umbrella to block the rain for you?" He Hung smiled. He didn't say that he left so abruptly that the servants didn't have the time to prepare. He gathered the other in his embrace, the muscles on his chest feeling her warm breath. "Just a few drops of rain, it's nothing." Chu Qingju glared at him and pinched at his waist. "Change first." Helplessly releasing the person in his arms, He Hung stripped himself bare in front of Chu Qingju. Seeing her teasing look as she examined him up and down, he asked, "What is it?" Chu Qingju rubbed her chin, and then came forward to caress his muscles. "Such a handsome beauty, why don't you let Xiao Yi have a kiss? If you follow Xiao Yi, you'll get to drink and eat well." Finishing, she went on tiptoes to kiss He Hung's chin and then quickly stepped back. She saw He Hung's little brother stand up spiritedly. "Standing up this easily?" Chu Qingju raised an eyebrow and smiled as she took another step back. In a regretful voice, she said, "It's hot morning right now. This servant has no way to serve emperor, such a pity." Finishing, she pretended to wipe her tears away. He Hung took a large step forward and captured the other in his arms. He turned and put her down on the large bed, fiercely pressing down on Chu Qingju and kissing multiple times before panting as he declared, "People say the fox spirits enchant people, yet I didn't know what was a fox spirit. Today, I know that one as tempting as Chu Qingju is a fox spirit." Finishing, his hand rubbed at Chu Qingju's chest, smiling as he teased, "Is beauty happy with the service of Xiao Yi?" Chu Qingju reached to slide her hand from He Hung's shoulders to his waist, the tip of her tongue swiping across the corner of her mouth. "Why is beauty so eager and so naked to throw yourself into an embrace? It's really making Xiao Yi embarrassed." He Hung's entire body was burning from Chu Qingju's actions. His hands pulled and he spent a long time on her body before in a raspy voice, he promised, "After these 3 months, watch how I sort you out." Finishing, he pulled her hand and slowly moved it down. In the end, He Hung finally extinguished the fire with Chu Qingju's help. He pulled a blanket to wrap around the two of them, his nose rubbing at Chu Qingju's fragrant and smooth shoulder. Hearing the rain outside, he said, "With Qingju, I feel that all the women in the world are just so. 1,000 of them cannot compare to one of Qingju." Chu Qingju smiled as she wrapped an arm around his neck, permitting him to play around at her chest, but she didn't speak. After He Hung ascended the throne, except in front of outsiders, he had never called himself Zhen in private with her. His attitude towards her was the same as when they had been at Duan Wangfu, and it was even more intimate now. She wasn't a cynic, so she wouldn't retreat out of fear because of He Hung's attitude. From a certain perspective, she enjoyed the good He Hung gave her, and she would return the same to He Hung. If He Hung really had feelings towards her, she would be delighted. If He Hung had no feelings for her, she wouldn't be heartbroken. And she had the confidence that before she would die in exhilaration, she would dig a hole for He Hung. Love wasn't essential in life. But if there was love to flavor her life, she wouldn't reject enjoying it. In the novels, the women tortured themselves because of love. But she wasn't the female protagonist, she didn't have to walk the road they did. She wasn't even scared of death. Would she be scared of this thing called love? Chu Qingju smiled coquettishly. Her right hand moved up and down his back. Just when He Hung became totally distracted, she kicked He Hung aside, grabbing He Hung's robe to wrap around her body and flipped off the bed. She stood beside the bed, looking from high up down at He Hung. The fact that the emperor could say such things, it's that you have seen 1,000 ships. But it's a pity that Kye only has emperor as the only man and doesn't know which man is better. So sorry to disappoint. He Hung had suffered a kick from Chu Qingju, but he couldn't find one bit of anger. He sat up against the headboard, looking at Chu Qingju, who had a raised chin and narrowed eyes, and laughed out loud. Why was it that when Chu Qingju was clearly wearing his robe, but he felt she was still inexplicably attractive? He Hung didn't know that the thing that attracted him, it had a special name. It was the composure of a queen. The palace attendants outside heard the laughter of the emperor coming from inside the room. Their expressions didn't change. They had never seen the emperor come and be in a bad mood when he left. By midnight, the thunder had stopped, but there was still a shower of rain. He Hung took advantage of the light from the night luminous pearls to look at Chu Qingju, who was deeply asleep. He quietly and softly made his way out of the bed. When he put on the robe, he found from the pile of clothing the pouch that Chu Qingju had embroidered for him, and didn't even tie his hair before quietly leaving the inner room. Ming He, who had been waiting outside, saw the emperor was holding his socks and shoes as he walked out barefoot. He quickly knelt in front of the emperor to help him put on his socks and shoes before asking in a small voice, "Emperor, return to the palace now?" Right now, it was the hot morning period. If the emperor stayed for the whole night at the empress residence, even if no one dared to say anything, it still wouldn't look good. He Hung nodded. He looked behind him and left with his attendants. Inside the room, Chu Qingju was sleeping happily. After finishing the matter of Duan Wangfu's shijie, Chu Qingju finally had the time to go to the 2 palaces of the 2 dowager empresses to sit. The past few days, she had made her greetings before leaving. Now that her title was established and she had finished off much of the matters in the Hugong, it was time to exchange feelings with the 2 popo. Muhu Empress Dowager wasn't very chatty. She spoke with Chu Qingju for a short while before letting Chu Qingju leave to rest. On the second day, Chu Qingju headed towards the residence of Shengmu Empress Dowager. Empress Dowager Wei's Fu Shou Palace was on the western side of the palace. Chu Qingju had to travel for a significant period of time on the Phoenix carriage until she reached the gates of Fu Shou Palace. From the names of the palaces for the 2 Empress Dowagers, it was possible to see the emperor's intentions. Muhu Empress Dowager had eternal and peace. When it got to Shengmu Empress Dowager, it was good fortune and long life. It could be seen that the best children were your own. Coming into Fu Shou Palace, Wei Empress Dowager got Chu Qingju to sit. Her treatment of Chu Qingju hadn't changed. Even when she mentioned He Hung's announcing of crowning her empress that was more like a love letter, Wei Empress Dowager wasn't unhappy, just smiled and said, "After Ijia, I heard the imperial decree, it caused Ijia to laugh for a long time. The emperor set his heart on you, that's a good thing." She sighed, "Don't think too much. Ijia knows you are a good child." If there is someone stupid in this hugong, you are the mistress of this hugong, just severely punish them. This was blankly telling Chu Qingju she wasn't going to touch the affairs of the hugong. This gave Chu Qingju a new understanding of her popo. According to the old ways, after a woman, riding on the success of her son, became the Empress Dowager, she would try to enjoy the taste of being high up, but why was her popo worried for her like she wouldn't be able to control the hugong? Muhu, don't worry, Urxi understands. She looked at the surroundings and found that the decorations were not brightly colored due to the mourning person, but they were finer than the original Zhongjing Palace. Does Muhu have any place that needs something to be added? Urxi will get them to do it immediately. With you and the Emperor on top, Ijia won't lack for anything here. Whenever something good comes out of the Department of Internal Affairs, you and Emperor always rushed to let them deliver it to Ijia's here. If you get them to send more, there would be no room in this palace. Empress Dowager Wei smiled and patted her hand. If you have any idle time in the future, come more often to sit at Ijia's palace. Any other things, Ijia would have more than you. Empress Dowager Wei was speaking the truth. She was the emperor's mother. The emperor was a filial son. The empress wasn't an Urxi that would oppose her at every point. Every day, she was being fawned over by the Taifei. She occasionally would summon Shu Taifei to chat about life realizations. If there was time, she would summon the artists from the palace department to tell stories to her. Her days were very comfortable. What she wanted had all came true. Her son was the emperor. She had a good relationship with her Urxi. She didn't want to be a female emperor. Trying to fight for the control of the hugong with her Urxi rather than living her good days, was she stupid? Even more, there were two Empress Dowagers in this palace. If she entered into the affairs of the hugong, the other Empress Dowager would naturally have reason to enter. Her own son's harem, would she let others meddle? So Empress Dowager Wei felt it was good right now, nothing had to change. Chu Qingju managed to bum off a noon meal off of Empress Dowager Wei. The Poxy also talked about the events of He Hung's childhood before she left in satisfaction. Walking out of Fusho Palace, Chu Qingju said to Mu Jin, Muhu is probably the woman I admire the most. This kind of woman, in any place, was worthy of admiration. The only pity was that she didn't meet a good man. Mu Jin knew that the Muhu the Empress meant was Shengmu Empress Dowager. As a palace maid, she couldn't comment, but she agreed in her heart. She was also relieved. If Shengmu Empress Dowager liked to control everything in the hugong, it would be very worrisome. When the Phoenix carriage passed the Imperial Gardens, Chu Qingju unexpectedly found He Hung was standing beside the lotus pond. Kneeling in front of him as a young girl dressed in a green girdled dress. Her brows furrowing, Chu Qingju indicated for the Phoenix carriage to stop. Mu Jin looked towards the lotus pond, her brows also furrowing. Was that one of the female candidates left over by Shendi? In the beginning, they had picked a few hundred candidates to enter the palace from across the country. In the end, only 20-something people had remained. But after Shendi passed, the candidates could only live in Tuanfang Hall and couldn't move freely. Running to the Imperial Gardens, that was breaking protocol. Chu Qingju stepped down the carriage, smiling as she said, Mu Jin, let's go take a look. Yes, Mu Jin carefully held the Empress' hand, and the palace maids and Taijian followed behind. He Hung's face was so dark, ink could be squeezed out. He was going to speak but saw Chu Qingju heading in his direction. His expression changed slightly, and he took a step back to increase the distance from the kneeling candidate. Qian Chang Xin reported in a small voice, Emperor, Empress is coming over. Zhen knows. He Hung glared at him, stop blabbing. Qian Chang Xin silently lowered his head and started to examine the patterns on the Emperor's shoes. The expression of the girl kneeling on the ground changed, and she buried her head deeper. I, literally grieving person, how Empress Dowagers refer to themselves. Chapter 91. Who can compare to my man? Chu Qingju walked over to He Hung and, not looking at the female candidate at the side, and acted to bow. She was stopped by He Hung, who put his hand out and pulled her to stand under the shade of the roof. Just now, Jun was going to the back hall to see you, and heard you went to Muhu's place. Is Muhu fine these past days? Everything about Muhu is well. Chu Qingju held up a fan and started waving it, moving her hand towards He Hung so that both would feel the breeze. Muhu has said for us to go to her residence to eat. She's always thinking of you. Since that's the case, then tomorrow, we'll go together to Fu Shou Palace for the noon meal. He Hung then pointed at the girl kneeling on the ground, his voice becoming cold. Do you know this candidate? Chu Qingju followed and turned her body. She saw the candidate's head was lowered and ordered, raise your head. The candidate was hesitant to raise her head. A Taijian behind her pinched her chin to lift it up. Her eyes were flitting around, afraid to look straight at Chu Qingju. She frowned. Chu Qingju did have the memories of the previous Chu Qingju's life, but much of the time, she wouldn't deliberately flip through the original's memories. Seeing the girl now, she remembered some unhappy events. She said coldly, "Isn't this Wei Gunyang? Just 2 years, Wei Gunyang has become more beautiful." This girl was Chu Laro Taitai's paternal family's grandniece. She had once stayed for a time in Chengde Gongfu and had a good relationship with Chu Yusu. If she had the time, she liked to jeer at the original. Was her name Wei Jing, or Wei Zhu? Candidate Wei Zhu greets Empress. When the Taijian released Wei Zhu's chin, she instantly leaned down on the ground, clearly very afraid that Chu Qingju would settle old scores. Didn't think Zhougong would willingly send you into the palace. Chu Qingju gave a yawn, lazily waving the fan in her hand. Right now, the Xuanyu should be living in Tuanfang Hall. How did you get here? When she finished speaking, she saw Wei Zhu's shoulders start to tremble. Originally, she had been bored, but she was now intrigued. She turned to look at He Hung beside her. Emperor, how did this Wei Gunyang encounter you? He Hung saw the mockery in her eyes and smiled helplessly. He narrated, Zhen waited a long time for you, but you didn't return, so Zhen decided to greet Muhu. Who knew that Zhen would encounter such a bold and disrespectful candidate, who dared to slander Empress in front of Zhen? Oh! Chu Qingju gave a small smile as she watched the trembling of Wei Zhu's shoulders increase. What good matter of Ben Gong did Wei Gunyang speak of? Wei Zhu was frightened. Originally, she was indignant that, the kind of woman that Chu Qingju was, became the Empress. Who knew that after saying a few words, the Emperor became angry. Seeing Chu Qingju's powerful composure so different than in the past, she was so frightened she couldn't speak. If Wei Gunyang doesn't want to say, Ben Gong won't force you. Come Empress, do you remember 2 years ago? Wei Zhu raised her head and resignedly spoke. At that time, Grand Aunt and Chen Enyu's grandfather made a spoken promise. Do you still have an impression? Qian Chang Xin heard the words and motioned for the palace attendants to all leave, leaving behind the personal attendants of the Emperor and Empress. He didn't know if this candidate would be crazy and say something. Since the Emperor and Empress didn't call for her to shut up, he could only not let the servants hear. Do you mean 2 years ago when grandmother and great-uncle had the intentions for Ben Gong to be engaged to your brother? Chu Qingju was very unrestrained. She waved her hand and stared at Wei Zhu like she was looking at an idiot, her voice surprised as she said, Ben Gong has such a good husband as the Emperor, how would Ben Gong remember those unfounded matters? Right, what is your brother called? My dear Empress, how could you just say it? What would the Emperor think? Mu Jin nervously looked at the Emperor. The result was that she only saw a satisfied smile on the Emperor's face. She was confused. Did something she didn't know happen? Even though he was slightly furious when he heard that the Chu family wanted to marry Chu Qingju into the Wei family, but He Hung was very quickly soothed by Chu Qingju's words. Those words were right. With such a good man as him, what were other men worth? Even more, the engagement between Qingju and the Wei family was only mentioned and hadn't been finalized. He wasn't as extreme to blame Qingju for such a minor matter. According to the attitude of the Chu family towards Qingju, he didn't believe that Chu Laro Tai was really thinking for Qingju. Thinking about the rich dowry that Chu Qingju had when she married into the Wang Fu, He Hung smiled coldly. They were definitely conspiring for the dowry that Tian Shi had left behind for Qingju. Thinking about it, he glared coldly at Wei Zhu kneeling on the ground. Such nonsense, you dare slander the Empress, such recklessness. Wei Zhu heard the discontent in the Emperor's words, and quickly continued, Emperor, please investigate thoroughly, this subject's words are all true. If Shendi didn't decree the marriage, Great-Aunt would have agreed to the Wei family's proposal. Since the engagement wasn't made, It naturally means that it was the will of heaven that Zhen and Empress should be together. To mention these matters deliberately in front of Zhen, are you trying to ruin Empress' reputation? He Heng's voice became darker, harshly proclaiming, the daughter of the Wei clan is of an improper family, and lacking in protocol. Past Zhen's decree, the members of the imperial house of Da Long dynasty are not allowed to take the daughters of the Wei clan as wife or kia. The daughters of the Wei clan eternally cannot be female candidates and enter the palace. This decree was breaking the upward road for the daughters of the Wei clan. Chu Qingju looked at the expressionless He Heng, smiled and turned her head. Her gaze landed on Wei Zhu, who had collapsed on the ground. Drag her down, bestow 40 blows and send her back to the Wei family. He Heng gripped Chu Qingju's hand, coldly ordering, in the future, if there are candidates that walk in the palace where they shouldn't, all will receive a beating of 40 before being thrown out of the palace. A woman that had been sentenced to a beating by the emperor before being sent out of the palace. She wouldn't ever marry in this lifetime. Chu Qingju watched as Wei Zhu was dragged out by the Taijian and sighed, I just went from being an unfavored Di daughter to being the empress, but so many cannot tolerate it. To get this kind of person to slander you in front of me, they think me an idiot. He Heng caressed the silver hairpin in her hair, his tone unusually warm, don't waste any attention on these people. Come, accompany me for a nap. Chu Qingju smiled, with Emperor here, I won't waste any attention. Emperor is brilliant and wise, peerless through the ages. Zhen's pillousness, isn't that also yours? He Heng smiled, his mood light as he took Chu Qingju back to the back hall of Tianqi Palace. As to what had just occurred, Qingju had such a good man as him, would she think of any other? Qian Changxin and Mu Jin stared at each other, seeing the same moved emotion in the other's eyes before silently following. The female of the Wei family was thrown out of the palace. He Yuan kicked aside the Taijian that was rubbing his knees. These days he often had to go to Shou Kang Palace to pray for Xiandi, so his knees were already bruised. Ben Wang's brother is so infatuated with Empress, that he could even tolerate this kind of thing. He smiled coldly, he does have good skill. Such a short amount of time and he has managed to control everyone at court. Jiao Duo, standing under him, heard the words, and hesitated before asking, Wang Yi, the circumstances are stronger than the people. Why don't we stay still now and wait for a good opportunity? Good opportunity? He Yuan snorted, by now, the people of Ben Wang have been almost completely suppressed. Laro Da's people have already stood on the new emperor's side. Among the advisors of Fu Huang, Tian Jinku and Luo Changqing have tight connections with the empress, they naturally would do their best to support the new emperor. As to the kind of people like Wei Wenguang and Lu Jinghong, the new emperor doesn't have to do anything and they would be the new conservative fraction. Fu Huang's abdication decree was written in front of the senior officials, and he did the seal himself. What good opportunity do you think Ben Wang has? Jiao Duo didn't think Rui Wang would see the situation so clearly. He hesitated before suggesting, since that's the case, Wang Yi, why don't you help the emperor with his affairs, then the emperor wouldn't directly attack you. The kind of person He Heng is, on the surface, he would make it more beautiful than anyone else. If he attacks, not many can compare to his ferocity. Originally, He Yuan was a very proud person. But after 2 short months, he was so beaten by reality, half of his pride had gone away. Even if Ben Wang submitted to him, he wouldn't be very close to Ben Wang. Even more, Ben Wang doesn't want to fawn over him. He coldly twisted his mouth, Ben Wang just doesn't want to see him well. Jiao Duo silently glanced at He Yuan. To keep going even with nothing at stake, what was he thinking? What should be done with the Wei family? He asked uncertainly. The love between the emperor and empress is stronger than gold. The Wei family's tactics are just embarrassing themselves. If they beg aid from Wang Yi, what would you do? He Yuan sneered. In the beginning, it was them that asked Ben Wang to help. They were stupid themselves and mucked up. It has nothing to do with Ben Wang. Finishing, he summoned He Fu in the future, if the Wei family shows up, don't receive them. Yes, He Fu noted it down and hesitated for a second before reporting, Wang Yi, the Chu Si Fei in Shi Si Yuan is seriously ill, should an invite be sent to the Imperial Hospital for a Tai to examine Si Fei? Wang Fei is responsible for such matters, why ask me? He Yuan impatiently waved his hand. It was clear that he didn't have the person of Shi Si Yuan on his heart. He Fu'er understood. It had been because Wang Fei didn't do anything that he had taken a bribe from Yaroshi to beg Wang Yi. From the looks of it, that one in Shi Si Yuan had lost favor. So he wouldn't have to waste any more time for Shi Si Yuan in the future. Jiao Duo, as a subordinate, when he heard a matter of the Wang Yi's Hu Yuan, he naturally closed his mouth. Only after He Fu'er left did he interrupt. Wang Yi, this one heard you have a Ce Fei that is the sister of the Empress, is it this one? He Yuan didn't understand Jiao Duo's meaning, it's her, but the Empress didn't have good relationships with the Chu family, so this Chu sure wasn't useful. Jiao Duo smiled, if that's the case, then please forgive this subordinate to say something overstepping the bounds. Wang Yi, you should not treat Chu Ce Fei too well. Otherwise, in the eyes of others, they would assume that you are feeling unjust on behalf of the Chu clan and the emperor would have more reason to target you. He Yuan waved his hand, dismissing, just a plaything, Ben Wang isn't at that point to waste so much effort on her. Jiao Duo smiled as he raised his hands, Wang Yi is wise. /N. Chapter 92 Karma Juzi. Yaroshi's eyes were red as she helped Chu Yu-su sit up on the bed. Then she turned to bring over the medicine bowl, which was steaming due to the temperature of its contents. Drink the medicine. Chu Yu-su leaned weakly against the headboard. As she took the medicine bowl, she saw Yaroshi's burned hands and grimaced, it's me who has dragged you down. All these years you stayed with me, when did you ever have to do this? Even if she didn't see it with her eyes, she knew that the medicine had been brewed by Yaroshi on her own. Now that Wang Yi didn't come to her rooms, and Wang Fei targeted her at every occasion, even the servants in her yard dared to steal and cut corners, pointing at the mulberry and cursing the locust tree, much less the kitchen people. Juzi, what are you saying? Yaroshi forced a smile and hid her burnt hand back into her sleeve. Drink the medicine and after a night, it will all get better. Thinking about what Chief Steward he had just said, she almost couldn't keep the smile up. Now that even Wang Yi wasn't willing to help Zhuji, how would they live? Chu Yu-su finished the medicine in a few mouthfuls. Seeing Yaroshi's state, she sighed, Yaroshi, do you remember my father's birthday banquet held 5 years ago? Yaroshi took the empty bowl from Chu Yu-su's hand and minutely shook her head. It's normal that you don't remember, but it remains fresh in my memory. Chu Yu-su grimaced, that year, I accidentally broke a porcelain in father's room. That day was father's birthday and breaking something was unlucky. I was very scared and purposefully got someone to lure Da Jie into father's room when she heard. Yaroshi remembered. She recalled that after Laoyi's birthday, he had been so angry that he slapped Da Xiaojie on her face and sentenced her to stand in the yard for a whole night. After that, Da Xiaojie became seriously ill. Furen wouldn't get a doctor to see Da Xiaojie. If it hadn't been that the Tian family had sent someone to deliver something to Da Xiaojie probably would have died that year. She hadn't thought that the matter had been connected to Zhuzi, and even more, she hadn't thought that her Zhuzi would have such tactics at such a young age. She hesitated before remarking, Newbie remembers that Da Xiaojie nearly died that year. Yes, almost gone. At that time, I was afraid and guilty, she coughed, but she lived. If she hadn't lived, then it would have been me who would have married into Duan Wangfu. Yaroshi's hand, which held the bowl, shook. She looked at the sickly complexion of Zhuzi and supported her to lie down and tucked the blanket in. She comforted, Zhuzi, you're sick, don't talk nonsense. Newbie will go see if there is something to eat. As she came out of the room, she released a long breath. She still remembered Mu Jin painstakingly begging Zhuzi to beg Furen to send for a doctor. At that time, Zhuzi's face was full of helplessness, and even used the reason of filial piety to refuse Mu Jin. Afterwards, Zhuzi had sent her to give some pills to Da Xiaojie and never mentioned it again. She had never expected the truth of the matter was actually this. She rubbed her arms, feeling cold in the hot summer day. Isn't that Yaroshi? A Yahuan wearing green saw Yaroshi come out and hollered, is Chu Ce Fei well? Our Zhuzi has missed her. Not well yet, thanks to Inyang for thinking of her. Yaroshi's smile wasn't pretty. This Yahuan was one who served another Enyang. Usually, they didn't have much interaction. But now, even a personal Yahuan of a Enyang could mock Shuzi. Such a hot day, it's such a pain to endure. The Yahuan's tone suddenly changed. I heard that when the Empress hadn't yet married, she had been abused by her family, don't you think? What it's like now, isn't it karma? She saw Yaroshi's expression change and smiled. Clapping her hands, she remarked, the heavens have eyes. People who do evil things don't have good endings. The green-clad Yahuan bowed slightly. I respect you for being a loyal servant, but think more for yourself. She turned and left. Yaroshi looked at the Yahuan's back. She gave a helpless smile and went on her original path to the kitchen. The news that the Wei family's female candidate had broken palace protocol during the mourning period for Shendi and was expelled from the palace by the emperor quickly became the joke of Jing City. The Wei family had some reputation in Jing, but now, they'd lost all honor and didn't have the courage to even leave the house. The female candidates had gone through countless rounds of elimination. Originally, they were people who had a chance to be given to other members of the imperial house or to be taken into the Hugong to serve. Due to the passing of Shendi, aside from the imperial house that had to observe mourning, even the common people couldn't marry for a month. But that Wei family, they'd thought to let their daughter capture the attention of the new emperor during the mourning period. Why didn't they think of the emperor's personality? Was he a lusty person? Even more so, the love between the imperial couple was known by everyone in Da Long dynasty. Was the Wei family's daughter more beautiful than a goddess? From where did she get the confidence to break into the imperial gardens? The second day after Wei Zhu was sent back to the Wei family, she was sent by the Wei family into a nunnery. The reason given was that she would cultivate morals and pray for Shendi and the emperor. Everyone knew that this was the Wei family pulling a cloth to hide themselves. The emperor had already sent down the decree. The daughters of the Wei family couldn't enter the imperial house. This Wei family was over. The 3 months of mourning passed by quickly, but He Heng still followed the protocols of mourning, paying close attention to his attire. This caused the world to praise the filial piety of the emperor. But not matter what, according to tradition, He Heng was now allowed to take new concubines. However, everyone in the Hugong knew that the emperor had no intentions of entering the Hugong. The 6th day of the 8th month of Qing de 34th year was the most auspicious day in the near half year as calculated by the imperial astronomers. The Ziwei star and its pair were bright, and it had the influence of the phoenix raising its head. So it was the most appropriate day for the crowning ceremony of the empress. The empress crowning ceremony was a very momentous occasion in Da Long dynasty. First, sacrifices would be offered to the heavens and prayers would be recited. Next, the emperor and empress would bow to the ancestors to notify them that this woman was one of the imperial family. Then the emperor would personally put in the phoenix hairpin personally for the empress and draw on her brows. Lastly, the empress, wearing the phoenix robe, would receive the bows of the royal court officials and the noblewomen. In front of the copper mirror, Chu Qingju wore the phoenix robe that the weavers had rushed to make in 3 months by working day and night. Though the layers of clothing looked complicated and majestic, it didn't feel very heavy on the body. The outermost wide-sleeved floor-length phoenix robe didn't have any gold or pearls, but it was so beautiful that it blinded everyone's eyes. As she watched He Heng solemnly draw on her brows for her and gently put the phoenix crown on her, she gave a smile. Once they finished everything, they clasped their hands together as they walked to the high platform. On the platform were the dragon chair and the phoenix chair, dragon on the left, phoenix on the right. Chu Qingju stood in front of the phoenix chair, slightly raising her chin to look at the hundreds of officials under her and watched as those people simultaneously knelt down towards her. Emperor, Wan Sui, Wan Sui, Wan Sui, Empress, Chen Sui, Chen Sui, Chen Sui. And then it was the 3 bows and 9 kowtows. Chu Qingju stood side by side with He Heng. Looking at the scene before her, she felt strangely exhilarated. Rise, the Minister of Ceremonies called, music. The music sounded slightly solemn yet light. Chu Qingju didn't really know what song it was, but looking at the reactions of the officials as they stood with bent bodies, she could guess that it was a very high standard for her crowning ceremony. After the music stopped, Chu Qingju and He Heng sat down at the same time. Then it was the officials' turn to bow, one by one according to their ranks. Then it was the titled women. Just to watch people kneel to her, Chu Qingju sat for more than 2 hours. After the people finished, He Heng spoke. Today is the Empress crowning ceremony, and also the year that Zhen ascended to the throne. To accumulate virtue for the Empress, the world would be especially pardoned. Those banished would be reduced 60 miles, those in prison reduced 1 year, those on the death sentence will be delayed 1 month to their execution. The people under shouted the Emperor and Empress were kind, and would be lucky for 10,000 years. Chu Qingju hadn't thought that He Heng would pardon the world at her crowning ceremony. Even though it was customary for the new emperor to pardon the world after ascending the throne, but waiting for today to announce the decree, it was too. She turned to look at the person beside her and smiled helplessly. Even if the empress crowning ceremony was done extremely grand, but the ceremonies for Heng Fei and the others were much simpler when they followed. Heng Fei's was still alright, but the other 3 couldn't compare to the occasions when the Xiandi's consorts of equivalent rank were promoted. Especially Pinged Siren. It was absolutely unbearable to see. If it wasn't that the Empress bestowments also came down that day, almost no one in the palace would have known that it was the day that she was officially titled. For people, what was worse was not being ignorant, but being able to make comparisons. All those in the palace were intelligent, and they could all see what was happening. This Pinged Siren not being favored by the emperor was a certainty. Since the emperor didn't care for her, would they be willing to flatter her? Feng Zijin finally knew just how difficult palace life could be. The food delivered each day was cold. The tea was old, and not of good quality. If something was lacking or needed fixing, it was extremely difficult for the Department of Internal Affairs to come remedy it. She had fought and complained, but in the end, she found that what was sent to her became more and more terrible. Sometimes they wouldn't even send anything. After these months, she finally knew what was the servants bullying the masters and the torture of the deep palace. Zhuzi, Han Liangdi has come. Xie Yun quickly walked into the room, her expression unpleasant. Feng Zijin grimaced as she stood. As she came out of the inner room, she saw Han Qinghe drinking tea as she sat on the chair. Her steps paused. She walked in front, bowing, and made a greeting. Pinky greets Han Liangdi. Please stand, Pinged Siren. Han Qinghe smiled as she examined Feng Zijin. The other was wearing a slightly worn dark dress, completely devoid of the arrogance she once had in the Fu. She put down the teacup, wiping her mouth, and remarked, "Your tea is too bitter. I'll have someone deliver some new tea to you tomorrow." Feng Zijin declined. There's no need to trouble Han Liangdi. We can't have that. Once upon a time, Mai wouldn't drink anything at Wang Fu except the long jing before the first rain. Now that you have entered the palace, you can't deny yourself. She stood, asking, "Today's sunshine is great, why doesn't Siren accompany me on a walk?" Knowing that she was intentionally making it difficult, Feng Zijin could do nothing except to follow behind Han Qinghe. Han Qinghe gave a cold smile as she walked at the front. In the past, when Feng Zijin humiliated her, she had been even more ruthless. What she was doing now wasn't really anything. Thinking about it, Han Qinghe turned back to look at Feng Zijin, the smile on her face growing wider. In the future, there was still more to come. The humiliations she had suffered, she didn't suffer them for nothing. Chapter 93. An old case. Because the mourning period had passed, the flowers placed in the imperial gardens now red and purple. Han Qinghe looked at the beautiful imperial garden and thought about when she'd entered the palace as the daughter of a common and good family to become a candidate. She had then been placed by Empress Dowager Wei to serve at the side of the emperor. In a blink of an eye, 5 years had passed and she was now one of the mistresses of the palace. As the palace maids passed her, they bowed to her. She enjoyed the feeling as others bowed their heads to her, as though if it was like this, she could forget her low birth and the unhappiness of the past. Turning back to see Feng Zijin blindly following behind her, she revealed a satisfied smile. Walking the imperial gardens, I would think of the times I'd accompanied Pinged Siren in the Wang Fu. Feng Zijin didn't speak when she heard the words. She expressionlessly looked at Han Qinghe before slowly moving her gaze away. From Pinged Siren's expression, "It seems that you don't like walking in the garden with me." Han Qing, he sneered. Or is it that pinged siren thinks herself higher than me? Liangdi is high up in the sky. Pinky is only a small 7th grade siren who doesn't dare look down, pinged siren uttered coldly. Pinky is only listening to Liangdi speak. Han Qing, he was going to speak before suddenly hearing the sound of clapping behind her. Her heart jumped with joy and she took a step to the side before kneeling down. Kie greets Emperor. When the dark gold boots walked in front of her, Han Qing, his voice was sweet and soft as she lowered her head. But a second later, she saw a pair of gold-embroidered slippers appear next to the gold boots. She paused and then added, Pinky greets Empress. Chu Qingju looked at Feng Zijin and Han Qing he as they knelt on the ground. This was the first time Han Qing he used such a saccharine voice. She looked at He Hung, who didn't seem to have any reaction, and said, Stand. Thank Emperor, thank Empress. Feng Zijin slowly stood. She raised her head to gaze at the Emperor but found the Emperor's gaze wasn't on either her or Han Qing his bodies. She lowered her face numbly, not speaking another word. Didn't think to encounter Emperor and Empress at such a place. Han Qing didn't want to give up the chance to show her face in front of the Emperor. Her appearance wasn't as good as Feng Zijin's, but she had a distinctive flavor when she smiled. It's Pinky who has disturbed Emperor and Empress mood. Chu Qingju looked at her blooming smile. Her lips curled, but she didn't speak. Since you know you disturbed Zhen and Empress mood, why haven't you retreated? He Hung's tone was icy. He looked at Han Qing, he who was draped in gold and silver, his brows furrowing. Retreat. The smile on Han Qing, his face froze. She didn't think the Emperor would not even take the slightest bit of care. She couldn't help but turn her head to look at the Empress and found that the Empress' expression hadn't changed from beginning to end, as though she knew that she would embarrass herself. She bowed in mortification. Kie asks to be excused. Seeing Han Qing he retreat, Feng Zijin followed in leaving. Before she left, she looked again at He Hung and Chu Qingju, as though it was the first time she'd met them. After both of them left, Chu Qingju finally smiled as she remarked, Han Liangdi has served Emperor for so many years, but her appearance hasn't changed at all. Han Qing he had been serving by He Hung's side since she was 16. Right now, she was just 21. In her previous life, it would have been the best years of her life. In this era, her age was slightly old. Really, Zhen doesn't remember what she was like before. He Hung glanced in the direction of Fu Shou Palace. Don't think of those people anymore, let's go eat in Muhu's place. Fu Shou Palace knew very early that the Emperor and Empress were coming over to accompany the Empress Dowager for the meal, so they had prepared beforehand. When the two of them entered, Empress Dowager Wei was in the yard trimming twigs off a pot of flowers. Seeing the two of them, Empress Dowager Wei stood and led them into the room. After washing and drying her hands, Empress Dowager informed the two, Ijia had the small kitchen prepare the dishes you two like. Later, you can have some. It was bothersome for Muhu to remember. He Hung stood to bow to Empress Dowager Wei, but his posture was more casual than before others, clearly showing just how mutual the feelings were between mother and son. They should prepare more wine-pickled duck feet. All right, your duck feet, Urx's duck tongue, Ijia had them prepare, you won't be lacking. Empress Dowager Wei apparently liked her son's carefree and intimate attitude. She gave a sigh. Even though the mourning period has passed, there's no need to celebrate Ijia's birthday. Tomorrow, Ijia will send a decree declaring to not hold a birthday banquet this year, and won't receive the court officials' respects. When He Hung came here, he originally planned to discuss the matter of Empress Dowager's birthday. But he hadn't thought that Muhu was so straightforward. It wouldn't be good to hold a big celebration, but it might be too cold if she didn't even receive the court's respects. Ijia knows you are filial, but Ijia has thought this through before making the decision. Empress Dowager's expression became stern. Son, you have to remember. To gain something, you also have to gain the reputation, then your conduct would be spotless. On the side, Chu Qingju agreed wholeheartedly when she heard the words. If one acted, they had to act to the end. To receive both the gains and the reputation was the only way to become a true winner. But when saying such things, was it wise to speak in front of her? I understand Muhu's intentions, He Hung nodded. Then on Mother's birthday, us three will gather and have a good meal. Yes, Empress Dowager smiled. Her gaze swept across her Urxi sitting docilely by one side. For a family to sit together and eat, It's much better than having those useless things. This son of hers, to say that kind of a thing in front of her, he really had his heart on Chusha. With Chusha, there was no risk of the relatives. She was also the established empress. After Chusha had children, a fight for succession would be avoided. It wasn't a bad thing to have love between emperor and empress. Since Muhu isn't having a celebration, then we should also save on Urx's celebration. Chu Qingju's birthday was in the next month. Her brows furrowed as she said, "It's always so noisy at a banquet, not that interesting." "All right, we'll save on us mother and daughter's birthday celebrations, and we don't have to endure the torment." Empress Dowager Wei smiled, saying to Ding Mema who was beside her, "It's almost noon, get the kitchen to prepare to serve." Ding Mema left with her orders. Once she left the room, Ding Mema finally smiled and shook her head. Clearly the Empress Dowager and the Empress were two kinds of people, but they really did form a connection as they interacted. To have this kind of connection between Popo and Urxi in the imperial family, it was extremely rare. But the Empress was also talented. To be able to pout, play, and laugh and do anything else in front of the Empress Dowager, acting as though the Empress Dowager was her own mother. Thinking about the deceased birth mother of the Empress and the evil stepmother, Ding Mema sighed. The Empress hadn't had it easy. She must really be thinking of the Empress Dowager as her own mother. The three people were very happy as they finished the meal. Empress Dowager Wei watched Chu Qingju lean back contentedly in the chair, smiling and teasing. To eat 7/10 full is to cultivate life. Eating like you do is of no benefit to the body. Muhu, Urxi is growing right now, I can't not eat. Chu Qingju giggled, if I'm not full, how will I grow my body? Empress Dowager Wei was amused by her words. She pointed at Chu Qingju, yes, have to grow the body. After you grow up, you have to have grandsons and granddaughters for Ijia to play with. When she'd finished speaking, she couldn't help laughing herself. He Hung watched as his mother and Shifu get happier the more they chatted. He silently took a sip of the digestive tea. So even when his Shifu hadn't grown up, his mother was already preparing to play with his children. Was this scene really Popo, son, and Urxi and not wife's mother, husband, and daughter? On the second day, the Empress Dowager and the Empress sent out their decrees. The main meaning was that since Shendi had just passed away, they had no interest in enjoying their birthday celebrations and were grateful for the well wishes from the people etc. etc. Instantly, the court praised Shengmu Empress Dowager and the Empress for being virtuous and filial, and they were the epitome of what a woman should be. He Hung listened to the officials' praises of his mother and wife and added, Zhen's mother and Empress have no interest in amusements. Zhen, as the son of Shendi, also does not have the heart for the birthday celebration. This year, Zhen will not hold a birthday banquet, you all shall not persuade otherwise. Naturally, the officials urged and urged again, and then under the Emperor's steadfastness, they helplessly surrendered. In the end, they hollered 3 times the Emperor was filial. Both monarch and subjects were satisfied. Standing at the bottom, He Yuan gave a scornful smile. The Wei mother and son liked to act. Even at this step, they didn't forget to act in order to achieve a good name. Chen has a memorandum. After the monarch and subjects enjoyed themselves for a while, the Minister of the Right, Wei Wenguang stepped forward, Emperor, this official encountered a 13-year-old urchin a few days earlier on the road, felt that he was pitiful and wanted to shelter him, but who knew this official heard a great matter. The atmosphere of the court instantly turned tense. He Hung's brows slightly furrowed as he urged, Right Minister Wen, quickly speak. This subject heard the urchin say that he had begged his way from Jiangnan to Jing. His father was a steward of a certain official in Jiangnan and had been killed because he found out that this official had colluded with His Highness Rui Wang and dragged his entire family with him. Thankfully, the urchin had been hiding out of naughtiness in the cellar of the home and his life was spared. He raised an accounts book with both hands. This is the accounts of the steward who had been killed. The little urchin, even under the struggles of the road, managed to protect this item. Emperor, please take a look. Once the speech came out, the court fell into silence. But no one dared to speak in defense of Rui Wang. Present it up, He Hung looked at He Yuan, Rui Wang, do you want to say anything? He Yuan sneered, raising his hands in a fist, responding, Emperor, Subject Di is innocent. Right Minister Wei uses an urchin of unknown origins to accuse Subject Di, and even made a fake account book. His intentions are enough to sentence him to death. He took the book from the hands of a Taijian and randomly flipped open a page to take a look. With a calm face, he replied, "What the truth really is, Jin will send someone to investigate." End quote. The officials realized that they didn't really know the emperor's true intentions. If he believed Rui Wang, then he wouldn't have sent someone to investigate. But if he didn't believe, then he should be in a rage. For the emperor to be this calm, they were at a loss. But smart people reacted very quickly. The emperor was going to settle the old scores of Rui Wang. Previously, the case of Jiangnan had been unclearly suppressed by Xiandi. The emperor cared for the people of Jiangnan and naturally wouldn't pretend the matter didn't exist. Jiangnan was going to see a large purge. Chapter 94 Appetite wide open. The case of Jiangnan was taken up once again, but this time, no one begged for mercy for Rui Wang. The emperor didn't send an official of high position to investigate in Jiangnan but sent down an imperial decree for the Ministry of Justice and the Supreme Court to cooperate in the investigation. Originally, some people had thought that the emperor would use the chance to take down Rui Wang, but who knew that he was doing everything according to the rules. He didn't seem to side with his brother, and didn't take the chance to settle the score with his half-brother. Many people were deeply moved by the benevolence of the emperor. Whether or not he was really so generous, it wasn't very important to Chu Qingju. In the palace at the moment, she dominated above all. And she ate, drank, played and amused herself greatly. The weather slowly moved into the fall, but her appetite became better and better. She preferred to eat sour and spicy food. One night at the end of the 9th month, she ate 2 bowls of rice, 1 bowl of hot and spicy fish, and 1 bowl of mushroom tofu fish head soup in one sitting. It was all home-style cooking. But she just liked it, and it scared he into accompanying her on a walk of the gardens for more than 2 hours that night. Chu Qingju's birthday was the second to last day of the 9th month. That day, Empress Dowager Wei held a family banquet at Fushou Palace. Other than their family of 3, there was only Muhu Empress Dowager, Jin and Princess Royal and Heng Fei present. The other 3 Fei Pin only kowtowed outside the palace doors before being excused to leave. Jiang Yongyu was the only one of the imperial concubines whose position was a first-grade Fei. Appearing at the banquet, she represented the generosity and virtue of the empress who was able to tolerate other women in the palace. But Jiang Yongyu understood inside what her identity was and what she should do. So after making her greetings, she picked the corner furthest away from He Heng to sit and quietly pretended to be a statue. After He Heng ascended the throne, he elevated the titles of Jin and Princess's children. Everyone in Jing knew by then that Jin and Princess was on good relations with the new emperor. Of all the princesses of Xiandi, only Jin and Princess's position hadn't been affected, and the people in Jing still carefully flattered and respected her. It was human nature. One's father being the emperor or a half-brother being the emperor, it really was 2 different things. No wonder some princesses would pick a side on the matter of succession. Jin and Princess managed to make a correct decision. Those who had eyes all knew that when the new emperor was still Duan Wang, Jin and Princess had been extremely close to Duan Wang Fei. When the news that Duan Wang had been attacked, Jin and Princess had sent many herbs and medicine to Duan Wang. Didn't her actions clearly show Jin and Princess's position? The other person who benefited was Cheng Wang. Originally, he had been a pitiful little thing that his own father didn't care for. But now, he could be considered to be one of the most trusted people by the new emperor. His wife had connections with the emperor, so overall, his status was even higher than when Xiandi had been alive. "Empress, your appetite is so good." After the meal, Jin and Princess looked with amazement at Chu Qingju, who was wiping her mouth. A beat later, she commented, "Eating is good fortune." "It's not that much." Chu Qingju took a mouthful of the digestive tea that a palace maid presented and looked in confusion at He Heng beside her, asking, "Really too much?" "It's good you like eating," He Heng smiled. He looked at the other's pale and smooth face, his fingers slightly trembling as he resisted the urge to reach out and pinch her face. He turned to order Ming He behind him. "Today, The pickled cabbage fish head and kung pao beef tendons were made well. Who was the chef? Reward. Ming. He noted the two dishes. He knew that it was the empress who liked them and indicated for a Taijian behind him to go reward the chef in the imperial kitchens. Empress Dowager Wei raised the teacup to take a sip, smiling as she commented, "Recently, Qingju's appetite is getting even better. When Aijia sees her eat, Aijia feels the appetite improving and can eat an extra half bowl." Hearing this, Muhu Empress Dowager smiled and teased, "Mai and Empress good appetites, even I at Chongning Palace have heard of. Even the imperial kitchen is thinking all day of creating new pastries and dishes in hopes of receiving your favors. It seems that our mother and daughter's gluttonous reputation has spread." Empress Dowager Wei smiled at Chu Qingju, completely uncaring of people in the palace spreading such news. She said to Muhu Empress Dowager, "Jejie, we have known other for more than 20 years. When Xiandi was alive, we were always cautious and alert. Now that our children have grown up, we don't need to live so cautiously. In this time that we can still eat and drink, it's better to enjoy it." Muhu Empress Dowager hadn't thought Empress Dowager Wei would say such a thing. She paused slightly before smiling, "You're right. A life is short and hard. We've endured for more than half a lifetime, it can't be put to waste." She and Wei Shi had no conflicts of interest. Now that Duan Wang had ascended the throne, he had treated her well. Even Jin and Princess, who had been recorded under her name, was the most important among the princesses. Right now, she was only an idle Empress Dowager. What did she have to worry about? Chu Qingju listened to the sisterly-like conversation between the two Empress Dowagers. If one didn't know, they really wouldn't believe that the two had once served the same man. The words basically meant, "We finally made it through, let's enjoy ourselves." But as the two chatted, the topic unknowingly skewed to land on Chu Qingju. Muhu Empress Dowager looked at Chu Qingju's waist that never grew thick no matter how much she ate. "Today is Empress' birthday, it's not good to let a Tai take the pulse. But, it's fine for a Tai to take a look tomorrow. If too much is eaten, it might harm the stomach." Her words were very euphemistic, but inside, she was suspicious of another matter. What kind of person was Empress Dowager Wei? When Muhu Empress Dowager's words came out, she knew what the other hand meant. She quickly calculated in her head. The passing of Xiandi was the end of the 4th month. The end of the 7th month was the end of the mourning period. After the mourning period ended, Chu Qingju was still living in the back hall of Tianqi Palace. Hunger hadn't gone once to any of the other women in the palace. It was the end of the 9th month now. 2 months had passed, was it that? The two Empress Dowagers were experienced and knew to not casually say their conjectures. Otherwise, if there was first hope and then disappointment, it was harmful. The two exchanged a glance. Empress Dowager Wei said, "Since Jejie has said this, I'm worried now as well. Why don't we have a Tai take the pulse tomorrow?" Chu Qingju felt helpless. After entering the palace, even though her body didn't have any ailments, the Tai would take a pulse every 2 weeks. They had also prescribed some tonics. She really didn't like drinking those things. He Hung's eyebrow slightly twitched. He then smiled, promising, "Since both Mu House are worried, this son will summon the dean of the Imperial Hospital tomorrow to take the pulse for the Empress." Chu Qingju put down her teacup, interjecting, "The weather turned cold lately, so I couldn't help but eat more. There shouldn't be any problems, but I should not cause both Muhu to worry." Empress Dowager Wei smiled and sighed, "As long as you are all well, us, as Muhu will be comforted." Chu Qingju's heart moved slightly. She wasn't stupid, so she could hear that the majority of Empress Dowager's words were sincere. As a popo, Empress Dowager Wei was really very good. Not even in this era, in the place that she lived in her previous life, a popo as fair and considerate as Empress Dowager Wei was rare. Thinking about how she and Empress Dowager Wei had interacted, from the mutual probes at the intimacy now, Empress Dowager Wei tried to do the best for her as the Erxi. Even when He Heng had given out a decree that was more of a love letter to announce to the world and not going to the Hugong after the mourning period ended, Empress Dowager Wei had never been discontent with her and treated her even better. Muhu's words have made Erxi ashamed. As the younger generation, as long as you have healthy bodies, and are happy, it makes us happy. Chu Qingju spoke with a smile, with a muhu so concerned with Erxi like this, it is Erxi's good fortune. Empress Dowager Wei stilled. Then her voice was soft as she said, stupid child, even now as empress, you make Ijia worried. At one side, Heng Fei listened to Empress Dowager Wei's words. Her heart was also full of admiration. When the empress had just entered the Fu, the Empress Dowager had been somewhat dissatisfied with Empress. Yet now, the Empress Dowager treated her like she was her own. From beginning to end, He Heng had a smile on his face. Even as they left Fu Shou Palace to return to Qianqi Palace, the smile on his face didn't dissipate. His good mood maintained itself until morning court. When he heard officials suggesting he take a few female candidates as concubines, his brows wrinkled. Some certain officials didn't put any attention all day on state matters, didn't do any work, and their attention was entirely focused on the matter of his hugong. Such subjects, what was the use in keeping them? Emperor, now that the mourning period has passed, your hugong is empty. This subject thinks that the Xuanyu should be taken as fei to expand the hugong. An official in the Ministry of Rites said, this is a critical matter of continuing the line. Please, Emperor, make a decision. The words seemed like they were urging He Heng to take fei. In reality, they were saying that the empress was childless, and wanted him to take other women to have children. The kind of emperor that was He Heng, he wouldn't listen to this spiel. If this person was speaking on behalf of the people, he might have felt that this person could be used. But this person was criticizing the matter of the women of the hugong. He Heng's face was cold as he looked at the rights official. Are you meaning to criticize that Zhen's empress has no son, or implying to Zhen to let other Feipin give birth to the eldest imperial son? This official of the Ministry of Rites nearly bit his tongue. He clearly only had been urging the emperor to take concubines. How did become slandering the empress and scheming about the imperial heir? He apprehensively knelt down. This subject did not mean that. Please forgive, Emperor. It was the orthodox way for the son of the Middle Palace to succeed the throne, unless the empress really couldn't have a child. He wouldn't dare to imply for the emperor to let other Feipin give birth to the eldest son. Wasn't that heretical? The empress has been married to Zhen for not even a year. Before, she had to observe mourning for Shendi, and then she had prayed for Shendi every day without pause. Such a virtuous empress, to be marred by you in such a way, it is abominable, He Heng uttered. As an official, the heart should be placed with the people and not to put the focus on Zhen's hugong. Does everyone here like other people meddling in their huyuan? Or is it that some people believe they can arrange everything for Zhen and make the decisions for Zhen? As the words landed, the entire court followed in kneeling down to ask for mercy. In this world, who would dare to make the decisions for the emperor? Wasn't that the great crime of treason? He Heng gave a cold snort, looking at the people kneeling below. Shendi hasn't passed for a long time yet. Even though Zhen used months to substitute for years to come out of mourning, but every time Zhen thinks of Shendi's appearance and voice, it still hurts. There is much less interest to take other women. You all are scholars, and naturally know what is filial piety and righteousness. To respect the elders is filial piety, to be responsible for siblings and wife is righteousness. If filial piety and righteousness cannot be achieved, how is one a human? Emperor is enlightened. He Ming shouted. Emperor is enlightened. This subject is ashamed. Luo Changqing and Wei Wenguang simultaneously clamored. The others followed in shouting the emperor was enlightened. No one dared to argue with the words, otherwise, wouldn't they be the person that wasn't filial or righteous? As to that official of the Ministry of Rites that suggested for He Heng to take other fei, he was so frightened his face was pasty white and trembling. The officials on either side of him silently took a step back from him to distance themselves even more. He Yuan looked coldly at He Heng sitting on the dragon chair. The unshakable love between emperor and empress, it really was an eyesore. Chapter 95. Pregnant. The emperor had become angry at court. The officials underneath were all shaking. But some were very envious of the Tian family. To have this kind of niece, it was really the good fortune from the previous life. He Yuan still attended court, but due to the case of Jiang Nan, he didn't have much power to meddle in other affairs. Hearing the officials beside him discuss the relationship between the imperial couple, he revealed a scornful smile. In this world, how many men had a love as deep as the ocean, and how many emperors could be like the Yuming emperor of the previous dynasty? Before the He family took the country, the world was ruled by the Tong family, and Yuming emperor had been a rare good ruler in the previous dynasty. This person had done something that was famous in the world. That was, his palace only had his empress, and no other woman. Many people had written their own versions of the love story between Yuming emperor and Zhao He empress. The stories were happy or sad, touching and wistful, but in all of them, they praised the infatuation of Mingyu emperor and his wisdom, as well as the virtues and intelligence of Zhao He empress. People always had a shortcoming. The rarer something was, the more they liked to tell of it. The fact that there was so much written about Yuming emperor and Zhao He empress, wasn't it because an emperor's true love and monogamy were rare? Thinking of it, the smile on He Yuan's face grew wide. How many Yuming emperors were there in this world? After He Hung left the court, he started to walk towards the rear hall of Tianqi Palace. As he walked, the coldness on his face retreated to become warm. When he reached the entrance to the rear hall, it seemed normal. The Taijian guarding the door saw him, and was going inside to report before being stopped. Minghe, go pass on Jin's decree. Summon the dean of the imperial hospital to take the pulse of the empress. He took the step into the door as he finished. Chu Qingju felt that as she traveled into this era, her hobbies became more and more elegant. Reading, calligraphy, flower arrangement, pruning, poetry, painting. She had done all of them. It was a pity that she could never have a sustaining interest in any of the hobbies. Disinterestedly looking at the bonsai that had been trimmed by her into a mushroom shape, she sighed, "There's nothing to play with this bonsai." Mu Jin knew that the empress was bored. In the Hugong, aside from the Feipin and noble women coming to pay their respects, it was the people of the Department of Internal Affairs coming to ask about the matters of the palace. After a time, it wasn't interesting. Empress, Nubi saw the chrysanthemums in the imperial gardens have bloomed. Why don't we summon some noble women into the palace to keep you company and admire the flowers? It would pass the time. Mu Jin suggested, this way, it can also decrease the distance from you to them. Chu Qingju sighed. No wonder when she had searched for historical information in her previous life, there would always be some woman riding a horse, woman toying with a cat, and scenes of parks and kickball. It was because an idle life was too one-note, and the crowds of Ms. Perfects needed to find things to pass the time. But the relationship between the empress and the wives of the officials was important. The emperor was the boss of the men of the world, therefore the empress was the boss of the women of the world. If there weren't any interactions, it wouldn't be right. A light, Ben Gong knows. 3 days from now, summon the wives above third rank into the palace to attend a banquet to admire the chrysanthemums. Chu Qingju pondered for a second, if there are unmarried DI daughters in the family, they can bring them as well. Yes, Nubi will go to let the female official announce the decree. Mu Jin wholeheartedly plotted for Chu Qingju. Any matter that was advantageous for Chu Qingju, she would cleanly and nimbly do, and wouldn't leave any blemishes. Just as she turned, she saw the emperor walk in. She quickly retreated to one side and knelt down, proclaiming, "Nubi greets emperor." Chu Qingju heard Mu Jin's voice and raised her head to see He Hung walk over, still wearing the gold dragon-patterned robe that he wore when at court. She stood, meeting him and asking, "Emperor, why have you come right now? When I got off from court, I remembered that a Tai was being summoned today to see your pulse and came to take a look." He Hung held her hand to sit down on an armchair at the side. Seeing the bonsai that seemed to be almost bare, he smiled and remarked, "Just now on the outside, I heard you want to have a banquet. Is it because the Hugong is boring?" Chu Qingju smiled, a bit duller than at the Wang Fu. "But it will slowly get better. It probably won't happen this year, but next year, I will take you out." He Hung touched her, sighing, "If you are really bored, you can summon Tian Furen in to talk with you, don't shut yourself in." All right. Chu Qingju felt that the other thought of her as a lonely and weak white flower. She smiled helplessly, responding, "Emperor doesn't have to be so worried. I'm the empress. If I'm bored, the servants would naturally think of ways to make me happy." He Hung knew that what she said was true and a grimace appeared. Treating her like this, he really couldn't rest his worries. This was what it felt like to have your heart tied up with someone. A while later, Ming He came in to report that the dean of the Imperial Hospital had arrived. Chu Qingju saw a 60-something man come in wearing the official uniform of the Imperial Hospital. A fine sweat was on his forehead. He must have hurried over. Otherwise, in this early autumn, where would the sweat come from? Subject Du Baizhu Shu greets Emperor, greets Empress. It was possible to know from the name that he came from a family of medical practitioners. Chu Qingju silently examined the Tai. His cheeks were red, his hair was salt and pepper, but his overall energy was good. He must have taken very good care of his own health. Du Tai doesn't have to be so courteous. You have been in the Imperial Hospital for many years and very experienced. Recently, the Empress' appetites have increased. Come to take the pulse of the Empress and see if there are any ailments. He looked at Du Baizhu kneeling and indicated for him to come near to take Chu Qingju's pulse. When Du Baizhu heard the two words increased appetite, he paused. Then after thanking, he bowed and walked in front of Chu Qingju, holding his hands up and apologizing. Empress, subject offends. Finishing, he took a silk cloth from his sleeve to place over Chu Qingju's wrist and started to take Chu Qingju's pulse. 5 minutes later, Du Baizhu switched to his other hand and then Chu Qingju saw his expression become joyful. Du Baizhu took away the silk cloth over Chu Qingju's wrist, his face full of joy as he knelt in front of He Heng. Congratulations, Emperor, congratulations, Emperor. The Empress has a slippery pulse, it is a happy occasion. Chu Qingju's eyebrows jumped. Slippery pulse. Did he mean she was pregnant? Really? He Heng, who didn't usually express his emotions, asked in surprise, can you tell how many months? Because the pulse isn't very evident, it shouldn't be more than a month. Unless a Tai had practiced for many years, it would have been unlikely to detect the pulse. Du Baizhu's face was full of delight, as though he was happier than anyone else that the Empress was pregnant. But at the same time, he didn't forget to compliment himself. Good, good. By this time, He Heng was grinning from ear to ear. He waved his hand. Reward, heavily reward. This subject thanks Emperor, thanks Empress. Du Baizhu gasped at his luck inside. The Empress' pulse wasn't evident, but it was definitely pregnancy. This time, he really showed his face in front of the Emperor and Empress. If this matter had occurred with Shendi, he would have been shuddering with fear. But now, the Hugong was managed by the Empress and the Emperor only favored the Empress. He had nothing to worry about. It was a very good thing. From today onwards, you don't have to attend anyone else, just serve the Empress, He Heng mused as he barely managed to suppress his joy. From the Imperial Hospital, you can pick 2 trusted people to be your assistants. The diet of the Empress, Jun will get a pregnancy mema to pay more attention. If there is anything that cannot be used, you have to tell the pregnancy mama. Jun requires you to guarantee that Empress and the child in her stomach will be absolutely safe. Chen will not fail Emperor's trust. Du Baizhu gave a kowtow. Wealth could only be found through danger. If he could serve the Empress well this time, his status in the Imperial Hospital would be unshakable. After Du Tai left, Chu Qingju finally looked in disbelief at He Heng. I'm pregnant? The palace maids and Taijian in the room were all kneeling with happy faces as they gave their congratulations. For them, the fact that the Empress had children, it was a good thing to them. Only when their mistress was well, would they, as servants, be well. Yes, you have our child. The smile on He Heng's face hadn't disappeared. His hand cautiously touched Chu Qingju's belly. As though afraid of harming the child, he quickly jerked his hand back. Tomorrow, I'll pick a useful and trusted pregnancy mama to serve you. Don't worry about any other matters, I'm there for everything else. Then the affairs of the Hugong, I'll hand over to the 2 Muhu. Chu Qingju wasn't attached to the power of the Hugong. Even more, with He Heng's heart here, she would always be the first in the Hugong. If He Heng didn't treat her well, it was useless even if she kept a grip on the power of the Hugong. Right, I have to tell the 2 Muhu, He Heng thought. Take a good rest, I'll be back quickly. I'll eat the noon meal with you. Chu Qingju gaped at He Heng as he rushed out of the room, appearing to float in the air. She shook her head in helplessness and then gave a faint smile. Empress Dowager Wei and Muhu Empress Dowager had been chatting together when they saw the emperor rush in. They were surprised, but seeing that his face was full of joy, the two were very happy, and also smiled. Muhu, just now, the Taiyi took the pulse and found Empress is pregnant. He Hung was happy and sketched a bow to the two. This son is coming to announce the good news. It had been a long time since Empress Dowager Wei saw her son forget appearances. She even felt that her son's eyes had become brighter. Her heart warming, she smiled, replying, "Since that's the case, you should be keeping Qingju company. Us here, it's fine to let someone else report." This son was just too happy and forgot. He Hung curbed himself slightly, but from each strand of his hair to his feet, jubilation was written in large font. "This son has also come to ask a certain favor. Ijia had expected that you were here about the management of the Hugong." Hearing it, Muhu Empress Dowager smiled. Ijia had managed the Huyong for decades, and doesn't want to suffer again. "If you care for your wife, then beg your Muhu. Ijia isn't willing to meddle." Hearing this, Empress Dowager Wei responded, "Jejie is making things difficult for me. I haven't managed such things before. How about Mai will temporarily work, but can ask Jejie for help every day. After our Urxifu has given birth, then let her manage herself. Us too, being Muhu, might want to be lazy but still have to care for the younger generation." "That's fine," Muhu Empress Dowager smiled, agreeing, "After our big grandson comes out, we only have to care about grandson." Naturally, He Hung gave his profuse thanks. As to the two Empress Dowagers expressing explicitly that they would only manage until the Empress gave birth, he understood the two's desire. Leaving Fuzhou Palace, He Hung got the Department of Household Affairs to present more good things to the palaces of the two Empress Dowagers to express his gratefulness. Empress Dowager Wei looked at the things that He Hung let others deliver and smiled helplessly. As a mother, she wouldn't bear to see her child in difficulty. The peace of the Hugong, to an emperor, it was an important matter. Chapter 96. The news that the Empress was pregnant quickly traveled from the Hugong to the court. On the second day, many officials' wives sent congratulatory messages to the rear hall of Tianqi Palace, expressing the joy the entire court felt towards the pregnancy of the Empress. Chu Qingju carelessly flipped open a note. The main idea was that the entire court heard that the Empress was pregnant and couldn't contain their joy, couldn't eat, couldn't sleep and had to write of their joy, and wrote a whole pile of good wishes before finishing with greetings to the Empress Dowager, Emperor, Empress etc. etc. The content of the messages weren't different, but what they expressed was the same. It was, "Us common people, we're happy today." Chu Qingju knew that the people had been keeping watch over her belly. If she gave birth to a son, it was the Di eldest son. In the future, even if the other Feipin had children, they couldn't shake the eldest son's position. Thinking of her body now, which was only 16, and was raising another little life, she felt complicated. And then she couldn't help but have another bowl of rice. The Empress Dowagers of the two palaces had already let the servants deliver a whole pile of useful and useless things over. Especially Empress Dowager Wei. She seemed to want to stuff the rear hall of Tianqi Palace full, sending over pile after pile of stuff. Chu Qingju started to wonder if Empress Dowager Wei still had anything left in her personal stores. Empress, Jin and Princess had someone send congratulatory gifts into the palace. Huang Yang held a list as he entered, which he gave into Chu Qingju's hand. Her Highness Princess Royal also said to wait until the flower banquet tomorrow to have a good chat with you. Chu Qingju flipped the list. The things listed avoided stuff that might cause trouble. It could be seen that Jin and Princess Royal had the intentions to become closer but was worried of getting into trouble. Putting the list to one side, Chu Qingju smiled. "Go tell the messenger, say that Ben Gong will remember and to let Jin and Princess come early tomorrow." Jin and Princess Royal and her, originally it had been half friendship, half beneficial. The way they interacted now, it was the best. Jin and Princess Royal might be female, but Chu Qingju felt that she was very decisive in her conduct. When she had separated from the Count of Beilu, she was unhesitating and didn't show any weakness. In the end, she had protected the reputations of the princess of the imperial house, and captured titles for her children. In reality, if the Princess Royal and the Count of Beilu hadn't separated, Her children might not have the same rank as they did now. After that, Jin and Princess expressed goodwill to He Hung and clearly distanced herself from Laro Da and Laro San's family. The action seemed reckless, but it was much easier to obtain the good opinion of He Hung that way. No one liked people who backstabbed. In the very end, Jin and Princess's step was right. Now, she was the most free, most important princess, the Princess Royal, of all of Xiandi's daughters. Even if she didn't have a Fuma now, who in Jing would underestimate her? A woman as skilled as her, it was no wonder that an emperor as unjust as Qingde Emperor was soothed by her to not care about traditions and make her the Princess Royal. Even Chu Qingju herself didn't think she could do as well. Empress, Cheng Wangfu sent gifts. Empress, the Duchess of Zhongyi sent gifts. Chu Qingju spent the whole morning looking at different lists. She sighed. It wasn't an insignificant number of officials' wives that were qualified to send gifts to her. She didn't know how much had been just placed into the stores without a word. Empress, Rui Wangfu sent gifts. The presents from Rui Wangfu came relatively late. Chu Qingju had been preparing to use the noon meal when the people delivered it. She casually flipped open the list and was slightly shocked. Did Qin Bai Lu really prepare this for her? 1,000-year ginseng, Tian Shan snow lotus, 100-year knotweed and so on. Things like cultivating bangles and other valuable objects had been stuffed in. When she finished reading the list, Chu Qingju felt that Qin Bai Lu wouldn't be this good to her. Something along the line wasn't right. Who sent this list? Chu Qingju folded up the list in her hand, her brow furrowing as she asked. Ben Gong has always been at odds with Qin Bai Lu. When has she been so good to me? Empress, you are the empress now. How can Rui Wang Fei compete against you now? Huang Yang responded, this list was personally sent by the steward of Rui Wang Fu, He Fu Er. It shouldn't be wrong. Right now, the emperor is investigating the old case of Jiang Nan. Rui Wang sending so much over, he must have other intentions. Chu Qingju just remembered that the court was in the middle of the case of Jiang Nan. Rui Wang Fu sending so much over, were they thinking for her to have some pillow talk? That was funny. She, an empress that the emperor put importance on, would be stupid enough, for just this paltry amount of stuff, to go beg for mercy for Rui Wang. Wasn't that was seeking suicide, being tired of living? The matter was overlapping with the court, so the servants attending Chu Qingju cleverly didn't follow up. This was a quality that Chu Qingju was satisfied with. In this world, no one liked other people saying things they shouldn't by their ear. In the imperial study of Tianqi Palace, He Hung finished reading the memorandum on the case of Jiang Nan, his face grave as he drummed his fingers. A long time later, he ordered, summon the Duke of Zhongyi for an audience. When Tianjin Ku came to Tianqi Palace, He Hung had finished all of the memorandums on the desk. Seeing him come in, he called, beloved official Tian doesn't have to be courteous. Zhen has called you today to discuss the matter of Rui Wang. Tianjin Ku hesitated before replying, the evidence has been conclusive for the case of Jiang Nan. This subject doesn't know what the emperor means. In his life Xiandi liked Zhen's Sandy the most, so Zhen doesn't want his life. But the case is truly frightening. Zhen, as a ruler, cannot tolerate such things to happen, he sighed, it's hard to fulfill both righteousness and loyalty. Hearing that the emperor had spoken to such lengths, Tianjin Ku couldn't even pretend to not understand. He immediately responded, Rui Wang's crimes are serious, but these cases were committed mostly by his subordinates who couldn't not moderate themselves and are not directly linked with Rui Wang. Wei Chen thinks that Rui Wang is guilty but not guilty of death. Then you say, how should Zhen determine Rui Wang's crimes? He Hung looked at Tianjin Ku below, mocking, at the very least, he is Zhen's brother. Zhen doesn't bear for him to live too bleakly for the rest of his life. Tianjin Ku's heart jumped, fine sweat dotting his forehead. The emperor, at such an age, had such a manner, it was truly shocking. This subject doesn't know. Fine, Zhen won't bother you. He Hung didn't keep going at the question. His tone suddenly became light, now Empress is pregnant. She had always been close to your Furen. In the future, if your Furen doesn't have any major matter, then come to the palace to keep the Empress company. Hearing the emperor mention such a matter, Tianjin Ku naturally happily complied. His niece was still very young. As an elder, he was happy she was pregnant and could steady her position as empress, but was worried she would be inexperienced and become worried and frightened due to pregnancy. Jin doesn't have anything else. You are excused, He Hung said with a faint smile. Tianjin Ku saw the relaxed expression on the emperor's face as though he wasn't affected by the case of Jiangnan and left unworried. When he passed through the gates of Tianqi Palace, he thought in puzzlement, did the emperor only summon his to ask about the matter of Rui Wang? But why did he feel that it wasn't right? In Rui Wang Fu, He Yuan raised a wine cup to take a sip. He looked lazily at Jiao Duo on his side, whose face was full of worry. He smiled, asking, "What? Ben Wang isn't worried, but why are you even more uneasy than Ben Wang?" Wang Yi, now that the evidence for the Jiangnan case has all been presented to the emperor, if the emperor would try to take your life, you have no way out, Jiao Duo sighed, suggesting, why don't we think of another way? Think of what? He Yuan snorted, if he wants to kill, then kill. The winner as king, the loser as outlaw. Now that he is the emperor, even if he didn't have the evidence of the Jiangnan case, he could still easily sort me out. But has Wang Yi thought of the people on the Fu, and Shu Gui Taifei still waiting for you to receive her out of the palace? If you get in trouble, what about them? Jiao Duo sighed. Don't worry, He Hung wants to settle accounts with me, but the hypocrite he is, definitely won't leave behind a bad name. The lives of everyone in this Fu will remain. He Yuan lowered his face, throwing his head back to drink to the bottom of the cup. Even more, the empress is now pregnant, he wouldn't bear to start killing. How did the matter relate to the empress? Jiao Duo looked in puzzlement at He Yuan. Seeing that his face wasn't pleasant, he didn't dare to use the emperor's name and responded, if that's the case, Wang Yi, why don't you take advantage of the chance and save yourself? I can't hide forever. He Yuan careless threw away the cup in his hand. Don't waste any more attention for Ben Wang. Ben Wang knows, you can leave. Jiao Duo looked at the wine cup rolling on the floor and left in helplessness. When he came out of the gate, he saw Rui Wang Fei standing at the door, and lowered his head, making a greeting. Qin Bailu didn't pay attention to him. She only stared at the gate of the building, as though the person inside was an enemy of hers. Wang Fei. Yu Hua saw that Wang Fei's expression wasn't good and carefully urged, it's cold in autumn, let's go back to the room. Now he doesn't even want me to meddle in the matters of Hu Yuan. Qin Bailu grimaced as she spoke. Then her expression became malevolent, the congratulatory presents for the empress pregnancy. He didn't even ask me, the Wang Fei, before sending it off. This Wang Fei that I am, what's the meaning? Zhuzi, don't be angry, let's return. Yu Hua reached to pull Qin Bailu. This was the doorway to the main building. What would happen if Wang Yi heard? Humph, Qin Bailu snorted, holding Yu Hua's hand as she left in discontent. It wouldn't matter if she didn't leave. By now, Wang Yi practically didn't go to her rooms, and didn't let her enter his. Chapter 97 Overestimating Oneself at Court. As the speaker recited the contents of the investigation, the officials listened with wide eyes and gaping mouths. They didn't think Rui Wang would have committed so many crimes. Rui Wang, do you have anything to say? He Hung calmly looked at He Yuan standing below. When Fu Huang was alive, he was extremely good to you. Why did you have to commit such major crimes? If Emperor wants to kill Subject Di, then do as you wish. There's no need to talk so much. He Yuan did not beg for mercy. His face was full of scorn as though He Hung, sitting at the top, was just a joke. If Fu Huang really cared for me, then I wouldn't be standing here today. By saying this much, you just want to proclaim me disloyal and unfilial. Jin has never thought that way, He Hung sighed. We were almost born at the same time, and had played together as children. Jin doesn't bear to kill you. Even more so, many of the acts were committed by your subordinates, and aren't seriously connected to you. He Yuan furrowed his brows and then sneered. He wanted to see how He Hung would deal with him. The officials looked at the expressions of the two brothers. On one hand, they were moved by the feelings of the emperor, on the other, they felt helpless at Rui Wang's arrogance. Rui Wang had been arrogant and despotic in Jing for many years. Even now, with such undeniable evidence, he was still so unmanageable. Pastian's decree. Rui Wang exhibited unruly behavior and forfeits his salary for 5 years. He allowed his subordinates to smuggle salt and buy and sell official posts and titles. Jun hurts at heart, but as Xiandi once told Jun to hold fraternal affection, Jun doesn't bear to but still has to punish. From this day forth, Rui Wang cannot enter court, is demoted from Qin Wang to Jun Wang, deprived of his salary for 5 years, and will write a list of his own crimes to be posted on the city gates of all the regional capitals of Jiangnan. The wealth that was seized from the Jiangnan case will not be taken into the treasury. Jun will personally send it to Jiangnan so it can be used to fix roads and construct bridges in order to benefit the people of Jiangnan. He Hung had a disappointed face as he stood. Qing can all leave. The emperor is wise. This subject asks to be excused. Everyone knelt to send the emperor off, becoming even more respectful of the new emperor. The emperor did not take Rui Wang's life, did not erase him from the imperial house's lineage. That was due to fraternal love. The emperor punished Rui Wang, used the wealth seized to construct infrastructure for Jiangnan, and asked for him to write his own apology letter to post on the gates of Jiangnan's cities. It was so the emperor didn't want to fail the people. It really was a win all around, with no flaws. This move seemed to look as though it was protecting Rui Wang, but on reflection, it was actually stomping Rui Wang to the ground. A Wang Yi who couldn't attend court, a Wang Yi who wrote his own crimes to present to the world. He wasn't a risk, and would become a blemish in history. In the future, people would most likely praise the emperor for being loyal and righteous. A ruler with such cunning, as subjects, they naturally had to be more cautious in their work. If they made the emperor angry, even in death, they may not have a good name. He Yuan quietly stood in the empty grand hall. The emperor on the dragon chair had left, the officials beside him had also left. He looked calmly at the surroundings. A long time later, he smiled lightly. To kill without a trace, as expected of my good brother. Your Highness, the little Taijian who guarded the great hall carefully walked in front of him and informed in a small voice, it's closing time. Looking at the Taijian whose legs were quivering, He Yuan smiled. What? Ben Wang is very frightening. The young Taijian knelt with a bang and started to kowtow, pleading, forgive me, Wang Yi. All right, stand up. He Yuan didn't look at the Taijian as he walked to the doorway leading into the hall. When he turned back, he saw the Taijian was still kowtowing, and laughed out loud, don't be afraid, Ben Wang won't ever stand here again. The Taijian froze. A beat later when he dared to look towards the doorway, he only saw the shining sun outside. Rui Wang had disappeared. He patted his knees as he stood, mumbling to himself, still thinks he's the same Rui Wang, such arrogance. The Hugong was very busy at the moment because Chu Qingju had invited the wives of officials 3rd grade and up into the palace. Those who couldn't get out of the bed were the only ones in Jing who couldn't come. This was the first time the Empress had invited the titled women into the palace. No matter what the Empress was intent on doing, the people under didn't dare to slight her. Some thought that since the Empress was pregnant, she wanted to pick DI daughters from the families of officials to enter the palace as fey to serve the emperor. However, those who wanted to seize the opportunity took along the unmarried DI daughters of their family, and smart people came alone, unwilling to even mention their daughters. Which woman in this world wanted to find other women to share their husband? Disregarding the fact that the Empress hadn't known she was pregnant when she had sent out the decree, even if she had known, based on the affection between Emperor and Empress, they wouldn't benefit if they sent their daughters in, and would offend the Empress instead. They also should think about where the Empress was living now. It was rumored that the Emperor had disliked the smell due to the new renovation of Kuei Yuan Palace and specially made a decree that, until a month after the Empress has given birth, she was not to move out of the rear hall of Tianqi Palace. The wife and the husband were living together. For a Kie to blindly interfere, wasn't that just begging for punishment? Chu Qingju didn't feel any different even though she was now pregnant. When she reached the imperial gardens in her phoenix carriage, the people who should have come had arrived. Once she got out, the crowd knelt. Furin, don't be so courteous. Please rise. Chu Qingju looked at the different varieties of chrysanthemums placed in the garden. She smiled, teasing, Ben Gong has met you all before. Furin, don't be restrained with Ben Gong just because the location has changed. The wives gave their thanks and sat down according to their ranks. Very quickly, Taijian started to place rare chrysanthemums onto the pedestal previously constructed in the middle for the women to see. Each pot of chrysanthemums would be brought up for a time, and then the next one would be even more beautiful. No matter if they were really amazed or just acting, they continuously gave their compliments, as though the chrysanthemums weren't of mortal hands and had been given down from the gods. Chu Qingju slowly drank a cup of date tea. She wasn't allowed to drink any other kind, not even ginseng. Red date tea was the only tea that was good for her and the embryo, so she had gradually started to change her diet. This one is interesting. Chu Qingju pointed at a pot of flowers where the back was white, and the inside was purple. She had once had such a flower, but she never knew the name. Because of her busy job, she never spent much time caring for it, and the flower, once it bloomed, wasn't as beautiful. Empress, this chrysanthemum is called the fragrant young phoenix. Because the petals are as beautiful as a phoenix, so it received this name. The Taijian that had been holding the flower answered with joy. Originally, he had thought that this pot wasn't eye-catching and thus, wouldn't receive the favor of the empress. Who knew that it was the only one the empress would ask about? It was a blessing from the ancestors. Fragrant young phoenix. Chu Qingju mused for a second, that's a good name. Mu Jin, reward. After seeing the empress admire that flower, the wives followed in complimenting it, making this somewhat commonplace flower become rare. This female subject has only seen chrysanthemums in the books, the plum blossoms are jealous of its fragrance. Today, borrowing the good fortune of empress to view so many chrysanthemums, it is really this female subject's luck. A girl wearing a light yellow short dress said in a moderately loud voice, the golden dragon leaping clouds was also extremely beautiful. Chu Qingju looked at the person who spoke. It was a girl, about 15 or 16. She had a simple shuang ping ji, but that made her seem even more youthful. For Zhen, that jade phoenix cloud was the most beautiful. He Heng, followed by a crowd of attendants, walked towards the direction where Chu Qingju was standing. He looked at the girl who spoke. Whose family are you? This female subject is the Di granddaughter of Grand Duke Jing, Qin Chao Yun, greets Emperor. The young girl saw the emperor inquire and stood with a calm face. She gave a full bow to He Heng. This female subject spoke nonsense, and let the emperor hear a joke. Chu Qingju saw Qin Chao Yun's elegant posture and gave a small smile. Wasn't Grand Duke Jin Qin Bailu's grandfather, then wasn't Qin Chao Yun, Qing Bailu's sister or cousin? But the looks, the conduct, it was more pleasing than Qin Bailu. Ian, you spoke too much, He Heng calmly concluded. There's so many elders present, there's no reason for you, as one of the younger generation, to speak. Qin Chao Yun seemed shocked that the emperor would say such a thing to her. She stilled, then with a normal expression, she responded, the teachings of emperor, this female subject will remember in her heart. Ian, this conduct was much better than Qin Bailu. If a normal person had been admonished by the emperor like this, she would have been red all over. But she acted as though the emperor was teaching for her benefit. Chu Qingju sighed. It looked like the Qin family did have some women with high attack power. Qin Bailu and Wei Ranlu's mother only counted as the failures of the Qin family. He Heng felt a bit surprised. He couldn't help but look again at Qin Chao Yun. She didn't seem to have deliberately dressed up, but her appearance gave others a feeling of elegance. It didn't stain the Qin family's reputation. When his gaze fell upon a pair of pearl-embroidered slippers, he took away his gaze, his voice even colder. Zhen isn't instructing you, but reminding you. At the very least, you were born of an educated and noble family, so your conduct cannot stain the reputations of the noble families. Everyone could hear that the emperor didn't seem to like the Qin family. They remembered that Rui Wang's Wang Fei was a daughter of the Qin family, and didn't have a good relationship with the empress. They instantly understood. This Qin family had married a daughter to Rui Wang Fu. The result was that Rui Wang fell. So they wanted to shove a daughter into the palace. They really did think everyone else was stupid and couldn't see what they wanted. Some of the Furen examined Qin Chao Yun's appearance and thought scornfully, just these looks, and she wanted to seduce the emperor. Could she even compare to a finger of the empress? The Duchess of Zhongyi, Tian Luo, took a sip from a teacup, uncaringly commenting, the reputation of the daughters of the Qin family is good, but the rare ones who haven't learned well, it's of no benefit to their reputation. The people beside her, hearing it, instantly agreed, provoking the Duchess Dowager of Jing's face to pale in anger. He Hung didn't look at the women, turning to walk towards Chu Qingju. Look at the time, the flower banquet should be finishing now. Chapter 98. As He Hung walked up to her, Chu Qingju prepared to stand and properly greet him but was stopped when he gently pushed on her shoulder. There's no need, Jin just came from Muhu's palace, and came here to take a look. Hearing that, Chu Qingju responded, it had been planned for Muhu to also come here, but who knew that the two of them would say that due to the complexity of the palace affairs, they wouldn't be able to attend this flower banquet. As she spoke, a hint of guilt appears on her face, as though it was her fault that the two Empress Dowagers were so busy. You're pregnant now and it's not necessary to do those burdensome matters. He Hung smiled as he sat down beside her, both Muhu will understand. Towards the two Empress Dowagers, he was confident of their abilities. Earlier, he had asked the Tai. They said that during a woman's pregnancy, she can't be exhausted, and can't be angry, or else it would harm the body and the child. That was a big no-no. Hearing He Hung say so, Chu Qingju smiled. This is escaping from frustration into relaxation. Even though he was sitting at the front of a crowd of women, He Hung wasn't the slightest bit unsettled. He even managed to disregard the womenfolk sitting below, full of ease as he chatted with Chu Qingju about some small matters, acting as though the other people were also pots of flowers. Using a gap in the conversation, Chu Qingju looked down. All of the womenfolk seemed to be comfortably engaging in conversation with those beside them. The atmosphere hadn't cooled because the emperor had arrived. They tried very hard to make the emperor feel welcomed. Chu Qingju felt that she couldn't waste the time of the womenfolk present and said, originally, everyone was to stay for a meal before leaving, but Ben Gong is pregnant. The Tai has reminded many times not to sit long in the first 3 months, so today, we won't keep everyone. To have neglected everyone so, Ben Gong hopes for everyone's understanding. The womenfolk who had children stood in succession, thanking the Empress for inviting them as they mentioned that it was important to be careful in the first trimester. They also said that the Empress and the embryo inside were full of good fortune, and would smoothly coast and meet auspicious events along the way. Chu Qingju smiled and let them leave. Before they left, she took another look at Qin Chaoyun. A pretty beautiful young girl. She knew how to show herself off. But it was a pity that she wore such plain clothes, but her slippers exposed her true nature. If a person had to act, then they had to make it more realistic. Except for the normal hairpins, the plain clothing, how could she forget about her slippers? The embroidered shoes of unmarried girls were frequently changed. Especially the kind that were encrusted with agate or pearls. Because it wasn't easy to clean, the pearls and agate would fall apart or the color would be wrong. So after they wore it once, they wouldn't wear it again. This caused families who didn't have the wealth to not frequently wear that kind of slippers. This was where Qin Chaoyun had failed. If she had really preferred plain adornments, why would she wear that kind of slippers? She might have had some schemes, some bravery, but was still too inexperienced. It wasn't enough in front of He Hung. Jin and Princess Royal had originally planned to privately talk with Chu Qingju after the banquet. But seeing the emperor protect her so, she felt she didn't need to say those things and smiled as she left with the other womenfolk. After the womenfolk left, the two of them returned to Tianqi Palace to eat. Each dish was tested by a Taijian before they started to eat. The meat and vegetables of the dishes were perfectly complementing and all of them were beneficial to a pregnant mother and her child. Chu Qingju didn't like how the dishes became slightly less flavorful but still ate a lot. After the meal, He Hung went to the front hall. Chu Qingju leaned back on the recliner, calmly asking, the people who brought their daughters into the palace, have you remembered all of them? Niang, don't worry, Mu Jin put a thin blanket over her. There were only a few families who took their unmarried daughters into the palace. Nubi remembered them all. Chu Qingju nodded. She was confident in Mu Jin. The Qin family is very fortunate to still be an educated noble family. Doing what they have done, it doesn't look anything like what a noble family would do. She wasn't very clear about the Qin family, But based on what she knew about educated and literary families, weren't they elegant, respectful, modest yet not false? Why was it then, when it came to the Qin family, it seemed that they were ruining the reputation of all literary families? Wasn't that morally wrong? Empress, you might not know, Jin Zhon, who usually had the most information, interjected. Newbie heard that the last Grand Duke Jing was a man of great character, who knew that the heavens were jealous and he died before 30 without even a son. They could only pass the title to his Shu Di's son, who is the present Grand Duke Jing. The Grand Duke Jing's personality is weak and usually listens to the Duchess of Jing. In the past, it wasn't visible, but the Qin family are more and more restless. If this continues, they might not be able to keep their label of a literary family. If that's the case, does it mean that the present Qin family isn't considered as orthodox? Yin Liu thought about how Rui Wangfei acted, asking, since they aren't orthodox, Rui Wangfei also acts like this? Yes, thinking about it this way, Rui Wangfei's branch is Shu. Mu Jin gasped ruefully, no wonder Rui Wangfei is like that. Even though she held a suspicious attitude regarding the division due to blood, Chu Qingju finally understood another matter. No wonder the conduct of the Qin family was so short-sighted. So the real decision-maker was a woman in the house. One had to know, in this time, no matter male or female, if they stayed in the home the entire time and didn't try to understand what was happening outside when they sent out orders, it was easy to make a wrong decision. The inner compound easily restricted a person's knowledge and judgment. When He Hung returned to the front hall, he abruptly dug out the list of the female candidates that the Department of Household Affairs had presented. Rui Wang's conduct has become confused. One of the causes is that Rui Wangfei could not restrain him. Zhen doesn't bear for Didi to have a person who doesn't serve him with the entire heart, and specially bestows some female candidates to serve in Rui Wang Fu in hopes their conduct can move Rui Wang. After speaking, he then circled 4 names from the listed 28, and let Chen Changxin leave with his words to send them to Rui Wang Fu. These 4 female candidates didn't seem to be of significance, but in reality, their paternal homes were all in Jing. Even though they weren't of exceptional families, they still had some standing in Jing City, and they had done some things which He Hung didn't like. So when he sent the 4 girls to Rui Wang Fu, he felt very good. He Hung put the list to one side. Right now, he didn't have any interest in taking a Fei. In the past, he felt that the variety of beautiful women by his side was flowers on the gold, but now he felt, regardless of how many there were, if they weren't satisfactory, they just took up space. Come, send down the order, bestow every one of the female candidates in Tuan Fang Hall a pair of gold bangles for their dowry. 3 days later, they can return to their homes for marriage so they don't have to stay in the palace. By making such an order, the emperor was explicitly telling others he had no intentions of taking the female candidates as Fei Pin, so his allowing them to go home to marry of their own initiative. The female candidates were sent home to marry on their own. The empress was pregnant, then who would serve the emperor? The people in the palace started to have thoughts, seemingly forgetting the lessons of the past. Qin Bailu listened to the servant's report on Chu Yusu's sorry situation, her mood light. She rewarded a handful of copper to the clever-tongued Yahuan. Raising a teacup, she said to Yu Hua beside her, I just want to see, without Wang Yi's favor, how long she would survive. Yu Hua saw the mirth on Wang Fei's face and said helplessly, Wang Fei, newbie heard that today at court, Wang Yi was. His matters has nothing to do with me. Qin Bailu smiled coldly, right now, I can't even run the inner compound, much less what happens outside. Seeing Wang Fei's expression, Yu Hua understood. Wang Fei still might not know that Wang Yi had been demoted and banned from court. This matter was extremely serious. If Wang Fei's state was seen by Wang Yi, would there be another fight? Ben Wang's affairs naturally doesn't have anything to do with you. He Yuan strode in from outside. He didn't look at Qin Bailu and Yu Hua's expressions, and sat down at the front, faintly remarking, right now, your Qin family has put their hats for the emperor, how would they even look at Ben Wang? Qin Bailu's face instantly darkened. He Yuan's words were ugly, but it wasn't unsubstantiated. If he said it, then it meant that the Qin family really did want to arrange someone to enter the palace. He Yuan lightly laughed, you really believe your Qin family's daughters are goddesses that everyone falls in love? Your Qin family might not find it embarrassing, but Ben Wang feels embarrassed for you. His fingers gently tapped on the arm of the chair, mocking. Also, if you say that you have nothing to do with Ben Wang's affairs, why don't you pack up and go home? Ben Wang will definitely ask for a divorce from the emperor. Qin Bailu's heart jumped. She looked at He Yuan, trying to find even the slightest hint of humor on his face. But his face didn't seem to be joking. Wang Yi. Kie was personally decreed by Shendi to be your Wang Fei. You cannot treat me this way, Qin Bailu stammered. You can't divorce Kie. Even if Shendi was here, if Ben Wang wanted to divorce you, then it will happen. Even more so, now that Shendi isn't here. He Yuan looked frigidly at her. Get out, Ben Wang doesn't want to see you. The rims of Qin Bailu's eyes reddened. She bowed and prepared to leave when she saw He Fua rush in, and then he said something which made it harder for her to endure. Why would the emperor bestow a few concubines down, and accuse her of not serving Wang Yi well? Qin Bailu felt that her face was burning like someone had slapped her, burning with pain. He Yuan didn't care for her, only ordering He Fua to lead the people over for him to take a look. Qin Bailu looked at He Fua as he trotted away. She felt as though a basin of cold water had poured over her, freezing her from head to toe. Chapter 99. Decay. The 4 candidates who had been bestowed by the emperor were all taken in. Only after they had become Enyang did the people of the Wang Fu find out the shocking reality. Wang Yi had been demoted. Since he wasn't a Qin Wang anymore, the allowances in the Fu and the number of servants had to decrease. The size of the Wang Fu had to shrink, so some people were going to be thrown out. Just as the servants were worried for their future, they heard another piece of news. Wang Yi had been banned from court, and his salary was to be docked for 5 years. Additionally, he had to admit his crimes in writing to the public. The servants who had been reluctant to leave the palace weren't reluctant anymore. They waited for the notice to come so they could find a new employer. As for the Taijian and palace maids who had came out of the Department of Household Affairs, they wanted to go back to the department to be assigned again. They would rather find another master than to serve one who had no future. At the very least, anything would be better than now. Qin Bailu hadn't thought that such an event would happen. She listened to Yu Hua recite the happenings, and choked for a long time before stammering. Didn't he want to divorce me? Now that he's like this, how can he divorce me? Yu Hua sighed in helplessness. Not speaking of the ego that Wang Yi had, even if a normal person heard what Wang Fei had said, they would have been angry. In the beginning, when Wang Fei just entered the Wang Fu, she rashly sorted out the concubines in the Fu. When Wang Yi said a word, the two started to fight there and then, a subject of much mockery by the servants in the Fu. Now that it was like this, Wang Yi and Wang Fei had nothing to say to each other, and Wang Yi had lost power. Wang Fei should be thinking of how to comfort Wang Yi or secure the people of the Huyuan. But she was rejoicing in the misfortune. To keep going like this, would there be any feelings left? Seeing Yu Hua wanting to speak but kept restraining herself, Qin Bailu uttered coldly, "Since Wang Yi doesn't want me to manage anything in the Wang Fu, then whatever happens in the Fu, I don't need to spend the effort for nothing. If anyone begs to see me, just say that I'm ill." Yes, Wang Fei. Having served Wang Fei for almost a decade, Yu Hua was clear about Wang Fei's personality. She wouldn't have appreciated any more conversation. She bowed and silently stood to one side. But Qin Bailu couldn't remain calm for too long. Because the Qin family had passed on the news that her cousin had been reproached by the emperor in front of all the noble women. Earlier, she had called in sick to avoid attending Chu Qingju's chrysanthemum banquet, so she hadn't thought such a thing would happen. Listening to the cause of the matter, Qin Bailu was irritated. No wonder Wang Yi would speak of her Qin family's daughters that way. So it had been because of this. It was also no wonder that her paternal family hadn't sent in their cards to her. So they had wanted to climb on the high branch that was the emperor. She was only a failed Wang Fei. What use did she have? After managing to clearly figure out the matter, Qin Bailu felt her heart becoming cold. Both her family and her husband were like this. She had no hope left in her life. Thinking about the pregnant Chu Qingju, she lowered her head to touch her own empty belly. She didn't understand why all the good things of the world happened to Chu Qingju. A good popo, a good husband, a good birth, even more, she would soon have a child. Who said that the heavens had eyes? Some people lived well and others didn't. Are you Hua? Pass my orders, Chusha is seriously ill. To prevent her from infecting others, she will not live in Shi Yuan. Today, she will move to the Shi Ping Zhai in the western corner to recuperate. She didn't believe all the women of the Chu family would be lucky. Are you Hua heard Wang Fei's sinister order, and shook slightly. Newbie will send it down right now. Coming out of the Zhengyuan, she looked at the large building and for some reason, felt a gust of cold enter from her back into her heart. Chu Yu Su, who had been sick on the bed, watched as the servants of the Fu roughly pack up her things and piled them in the middle of the room. She hated Qin Bai Lu for being cruel and hated herself because she couldn't do anything to the loathsome servants. After the things in the room were packed up, one of the mamas came up and jerked off the blanket on her, coldly announcing, Chu Fei, you should get up. Wang Fei has ordered for you to move to Shi Ping Zhai before midnight. Newbie will have to offend you here. She easily pulled Chu Yu Su from the bed, who was dressed in her undergarments. Chu Yu Su was seriously ill and couldn't tolerate her handling. Her body froze and she started to cough. As she covered her mouth, she looked hatefully at the mama, wanting to eat her flesh and break her bones. Fei, don't look like that at Newbie. Newbie isn't the one at fault. The mama waved her hand saying to the other Yahuan behind her, what are you doing standing there? Help Fei change. When Yaroshi carried a bowl of hot medicine to enter the Yuan, she coincidentally saw Chu Yu Su being pulled out of the room by two mamas, wearing a repulsive colored dress, her hair falling messily behind her back, cutting an extremely sorry figure. What are you doing to Fei? She put the bowl onto the ground and tried to rush forward to push aside the mamas dragging Fei. Yaroshi Gunyang, this is Wang Fei's order, you shouldn't interfere. The mama who was in command sneered, if you make a fuss, I can only assume you are angry at Wang Fei and deliberately opposing Wang Fei's command. Yaroshi stilled. She was panicked and angry as she went forward to support Chu Yu Su, coldly asking, what do you mean mama? That it is Wang Fei's intention for Fei not to be properly attired. The mama twisted her mouth and then responded, Yaroshi Gunyang should say less. I'm old and can't hear anything. She waved her hand for the servants to drag Chu Yu Su away. Yaroshi could only follow. The Shi Ping Zhai's name was better than the room. Yaroshi knelt by the bed with red eyes, looking at her mistress who was unnaturally flushed, kowtowing as she said, Zhuzi, Newbie will ask for Wang Yi to come. Wang Yi will save you. There's no need to go, Wang Yi won't come. She looked at Yaroshi who was crying in hurt, smiling, don't cry, everyone has to make the journey. She had been ill originally, and after suffering such an ordeal, she wouldn't survive. Zhuzi, don't say that, you will get better. Yaroshi went forward to grasp Chu Yu Su's hand, Newbie will go make medicine for you, you'll get better after eating it. Chu Yu Su shook her head. In a daze, she seemed to have seen the beautiful lanterns at the riverside at the Lantern Festival, the bustling and tight crowds, and Chu Qingju and the emperor holding hands. She muttered, that originally belonged to me, it's mine Chu Qingju. Why her voice gradually grew smaller and finally faded in the silence of the room. Yaroshi looked at the motionless person on the bed and cried out loud. Wang Fei, Chu Fei of Shi Ping Zhai has passed. Are you Hua entered the room and saw Wang Fei was reading a book by the window. She went forward to report in a small voice, Yaroshi, the servant of Chu Fei, hopes to see Wang Yi. Qin Bai Lu flipped a page, her head not lifting as she rejected, let her go beg he Fu I can't make the decision. Are you Hua saw that Wang Fei didn't want to speak and could only retreat. Looking at Yaroshi waiting at the door, wearing plain clothing and her bright red and swollen eyes, she revealed a conflicted expression, not knowing how to tell her. Wang Fei said that she hasn't been in charge of the household recently. If you want to see Wang Yi, then go find Chief Steward He. Are you Hua furtively looked at the surroundings and quickly stuffed a pouch filled with silver into Yaroshi's hands before acting normal as she returned to the Zhengyuan. Yaroshi slowly stood up. Looking at the pouch in her hand, she walked blankly towards the main building. No matter what, Zhuzi had served Wang Yi for a length of time. Would he not even let the person be properly buried after death? He Yuan had a beautiful woman in his arms as she served him wine. As he became drunk, He let another beauty play the zither to raise his spirits. He drank until he was almost senseless, and couldn't even see clearly. Wang Yi, Chu Si Fei has passed away. He Fua reported at his side. Yarrow Shi, who served Si Fei, asks for an audience. Who is Chu Si Fei? He Yuan placed a kiss on the face of the beauty in his arms. As the woman laughed, he frowned. Gone is gone, why tell Ben Wang? Wang Yi, Chu Si Fei is Empress half-sister. He Fua saw that Wang Yi was drunk and could only pour tea as he added, many people are looking from the outside. No matter how it really was, they should make it appear better. The Mai of the Empress, He Yuan pushed away the beauty in his arms, rubbing his forehead to clear his mind. He took a long draw of the tea He Fua handed over. If that's the case, then make sure the servants won't slight her, and bury according to protocol. Not slighting yet according to protocol. That would be difficult. He Fua thought but didn't show any of it. Thinking about whom to appoint to carry out the affair, he praised, Wang Yi can take care of her, it's her good fortune. This one will get someone to do so. He Yuan sneered, if she wasn't Empress Mai, Ben Wang wouldn't have spent the thought. He Fua changed. The fact that Chu Si Fei had a jejie who is the Empress, it is her good fortune. Alright, He Yuan gave a yawn, according to you, then isn't it the Empress' misfortune to have a sister like her? He Fua laughed dryly. He knew that Wang Yi was drunk and didn't dare to reply. Leave. He Yuan once again gathered the beauty beside him into his arms. Don't disturb Ben Wang. There were many women in Rui Wang Fu. It wasn't a major matter for a Ce Shi to die, but this Ce Shi was the Empress Mai. So they had to find someone to report it into the palace. The news first passed to the Department of Household Affairs, then the department would report to the Empress. But, according to emotional reasoning, this matter should have been reported to the Empress directly. Yet, according to protocol, Chu Yusu was only a Ce Shi. Such an unlucky minor matter shouldn't ever have passed to the Empress. In the end, He Fua pondered for a long time before finding a circular way. Chu Qingju had been perplexed upon hearing that the junior supervisor of the Department of Household Affairs had asked for an audience. At the moment, she wasn't in charge of palace affairs, so why was the supervisor running to her? When she finished reading the announcement of death that the supervisor had presented, she felt conflicted inside. She held the letter, but didn't know what to say. In her impressions, Chu Yusu was a talented and beautiful woman. She could have married into a good family, but she had to run with her ambitions and picked a wrong path, ruining her life. If she hadn't become a concubine of Rui Wang Fu in the beginning, and instead married a son of a noble family, then she wouldn't have lost her life. Weakness could harm one's life, that was the original Chu Qingju. Greed could ruin a woman, that had been Chu Yusu. The former was pitiful, the latter was lamentable. Empress, the junior supervisor of the Department of Household Affairs, saw the Empress' expression wasn't well and his heart jumped. He didn't know what the Empress was thinking. You are excused. Chu Qingju put down the letter in her hand, waving her hand. Huang Yang, take some people with you to Rui Wang Fu, and burn some incense for Ben Gong to Chu Si Fei, and add some paper money and candles. It was lamentable as a concubine, but as a wife, how many women were happy? In this era of one wife and many concubines, women were fated to sacrifice themselves in history. Chapter 100 Empress, this is what the Emperor ordered Nubi to deliver to you. Chu Qingju looked at the objects the palace maids held and saw that it was clothing and shoes suited for a pregnant female. She smiled, commenting, it must have been difficult for Emperor to take all this trouble. Even though the palace maids on her side had already made many pieces for her, she would remember He Heng's goodwill. Mu Jin saw the palace maids out to the doorway of the hall. When she came back, she found that everything had already been sorted away. She assumed Chu Xiajie's death a few days earlier had affected the mood of the Empress, and went forward to ask, Nyang Nyang, Nubi heard the Tai say that when the embryo is 3 or 4 months old, there would be movements. Have you felt anything? Really? Ben Gong had thought it was an upset stomach. Chu Qingju had been very interested in the fetus in her belly. She rubbed her chin, pondering, no wonder I kept feeling strange movements in my belly. If it was an ailment of the digestive system, Dean Du would have already found it. Mu Jin opened the windows in the room, looking at the appearance of the sky. Newbie sees that the weather is well, Nyang Nyang could take a walk. Lu Mimar, who had been standing silently at one side, looked out the window and nodded. Mu Jin Gunyang is right. Right now, His Highness has been in Nyang Nyang's belly for more than 3 months. Appropriate walking would be beneficial for you and His Highness. Lu Mimar had been He Hung's decreed pregnancy Mimar. She was extremely knowledgeable about pregnancy. For Chu Qingju, she was an encyclopedia of pregnancy. From movement to diet to thinking, she knew everything. Since Lu Mimar says so, then let's walk. Chu Qingju touched her face, and took Jin Zhon's hand to stand up from the recliner. Mu Jin placed a fox skin cape to Chu Qingju before allowing Chu Qingju to walk outside. The weather at the beginning of winter wasn't very cold. Chu Qingju uneasily pulled at the cape on her body, taking in the sun that had no heat. Giving a yawn, she asked, "Heard yesterday that Emperor punished a palace maid. Do you know what happened?" Mu Jin and Jin Zhon exchanged a glance. In the end, it was Mu Jin who spoke. Newbie isn't very clear but only heard that the Emperor found that the attire of the maid broke protocol. It provoked the Emperor's temper and he flared out. They had been afraid that this matter would affect the mood of the Empress and hadn't told her. Even though they hadn't said anything to Nyang Nyang, how did Nyang Nyang know? Chu Qingju knew what they were thinking, lazily pointing out, "Ben Gong is pregnant, many people in the Hugong are having thoughts. Now, even the palace maids have other ideas. Nyang Nyang, it doesn't matter what they think since Emperor isn't interested in them. What you should do now is rest and take care of the fetus. Why should you waste attention on these people?" Mu Jin urged. "Furthermore, Nyang Nyang, you are Empress, can anyone overtake you?" "Naturally, I won't waste attention on these people." Chu Qingju curled her lips in a smile, looking at a corner in front of her, "But there are those people who come to hinder Ben Gong's eyes." Mu Jin and Jin Zhon simultaneously followed Chu Qingju's gaze. Their faces both darkened. It was Han Liangdi and the Emperor standing together as they talked. Looking at the smile on Han Liangdi's face, it was as though she had found a treasure. Seeing the scene, the two looked worriedly at the Empress and found the smile on the corner of the Empress' mouth had grown wide. Her eyes, though, had grown cold. Mu Jin couldn't resist saying, "Nyang Nyang, maybe the Emperor just coincidentally encountered Han Liangdi." Chu Qingju snorted. There weren't that many coincidences in the world, and not that many emperors who would keep themselves pure for a woman. The previous dynasty had Yu Ming Emperor and he had been extolled for a few hundred years. It could be seen just how rare the love of an emperor was, one in a few hundred years. Han Liangdi hadn't thought she would coincidentally encounter the emperor in the imperial gardens. She looked bashfully at the upright figure of He Heng, asking in a soft voice, "Emperor, Kie has learned a new song a few days ago, does Emperor want to listen?" Han Liangdi's voice is like a oriole in a valley. "Zhen hasn't heard you sing for a time." He Heng saw a pavilion nearby and pointed at it. "How about you sing for Zhen today?" Han Liangdi was so happy she almost couldn't disguise her expression. Following behind the emperor and watching as he sat, she said, "Kie will disgracefully present." Cutting by candlelight by the western window, the moonlight silver frost, asking when next month she would return, but saw that she was at another place. Ming He, standing by He Heng, listened and then sniffed his nose. The song seemed as though Han Liangdi was trying to invite favor from the emperor. She doesn't see the other's tears, and doesn't know of the other's hurt when the song ended. Han Liangdi's eyes were slightly red as she pretended to be unaffected and bowed to He Heng. "Kie's voice isn't as good as it was once, sorry to have disappointed the emperor." Han Liangdi's songs are as pleasing to the ear as before, Zhen. He Heng glanced outside the pavilion and his eyelids jumped. Zhen thinks that these matters of music, it's fine to play with occasionally, but shouldn't pay too much attention to these things. Right now, you are a 5th grade Liangdi. It isn't very dignified to practice singing all day. In the future, if you want Zhen to listen to a song, you can let the Department of Music rehearse and then let Zhen see. She hadn't thought she would hear such a thing. Han Liangdi instantly choked. Even the tears that had almost brimmed out were choked down. Emperor's words are too harsh. Kie feels that Han Liangdi's songs are very good, and the people of the music department cannot compare. Chu Qingju held Mu Jin's hand as she walked into the pavilion. After she walked in front of He Heng, She was going to bend in a greeting but was held up by He Hung. If you like it, then let Han Liangdi go back and practice more. In the future, you and Zhen can listen together. He Hung supported her to sit beside him, placing a stack of pastries in front of her, or you can let Han Liangdi sing now. Zhen remembers that Han Liangdi had a Tan Lian Fu that she sang well. Chu Qingju smiled enchantingly, her eyes flickering before resting on Han Liangdi. After thinking for a short while, she shook her head, rejecting, "No, it's all right. It's just as Emperor has said, Han Liangdi might not have a high rank but she is one of the Faipin of the palace. To let her sing for Kier, it is too humiliating. You are the Empress who mothers the world. There's no humiliation in her singing for you." He Hung slightly raised his chin as he looked at Han Liangdi. "Han Liangdi, what do you say? To be able to sing for Emperor and Empress is Kie's good fortune." Han Qinghe forced out a warm smile and bowed to Chu Qingju. "Please Nyang Nyang, allow Pinky to sing for you." She felt half of her heart was freezing and the other half was boiling. The turmoil was extremely painful, but she had to make herself a singer. Peach blossoms are bewitching, pear blossoms white, only the lotus blossom. Chu Qingju gave a yawn and lazily leaned on He Hung's shoulder, muttering, "Today's weather is so good, it makes people sleepy." He Hung knew that after a woman became pregnant, she was easily drowsy. He reached around her back to let her lean more comfortably. The other hand slowly held a teacup that he sipped from as he frequently lowered his head to look at Chu Qingju leaning on his shoulder. Han Qinghe looked at the scene and for some reason, felt her throat hurt, as though singing one word was extremely difficult. By the end, even she didn't know how she sang. "Stop," He Hung said in a small voice, "Empress is asleep, don't disturb her." He bent down to lift the person leaning on his shoulder. Then he took a deep breath, pretty heavy. His Empress looked beautiful and had a thin waist. Even 3 months pregnant, her belly wasn't visible. But when he lifted her, he found that she was much heavier than in the past. It did seem that what she ate every day was effective. Thinking that Chu Qingju's belly would get bigger in the next few months, he couldn't help but furrow his brow. By that time, he didn't know how much Chu Qingju would endure. Even sleep would be difficult then. "Emperor, why don't Nukai get someone to bring the sedan?" Seeing the situation, Minghe came forward to ask. "No need," He Hung firmly held Chu Qingju, "this place isn't far from Tianqi Palace." "Yes," Minghe complied and dropped to follow behind with a bent body. He prepared for the possibility of the Emperor's hands faltering. He would use his body to cushion the Empress. From there to the rear hall of Tianqi Palace, it was a somewhat horrifying experience for him. Respectfully seeing off Emperor and Empress, Han Qinghe watched as the Emperor carried the Empress down the stairs of the pavilion. When she couldn't see their figures anymore, she finally angrily threw the cups from the table. What did the Empress mean, that she, Han Qinghe, was born to be a singer? They were all the Emperor's women, yet she had to sing for the other to hear. Zhuzi, the palace maid behind her, was frightened by her actions. Scanning the surroundings, she sighed when she saw no one was around, urging, "Don't be angry outside, be careful since the walls have ears." Right now, she's pregnant and can't serve the Emperor, but she's still holding on to the Emperor and not letting go. Even like this, many people are praising her for being virtuous. Han Qinghe's anger couldn't be restrained. In the recent days as she bullied Feng Zi, she forgot her bounds and also forgot her identity. Zhuzi. The palace maid was so frightened her legs grew weak, kneeling in front of her. "Stop talking, that will get your head chopped off. Stand up. Why do I only have people as stupid as you serving me?" Han Qinghe breathed heavily. Seeing the person beside her pale in fright, she slowly calmed down. Return. Such a good chance to get close to the Emperor had been ruined by Chu Qingju just like that. It was enough to make people hate. Chu Qingju had her eyes closed as she leaned into He Hung's embrace. Hearing his ever heavier breaths, she opened her eyes when they neared Tianqi Palace. She looked confusedly at the surroundings, before raising her head to look at He Hung. "Emperor? Awake." He Hung stopped walking, lowering his head to look at the woman with a confused face in his arms. "You fell asleep. I'm taking you back to the palace." "I'm much heavier now, set me down," Chu Qingju urged. "Emperor, how could you carry me this entire way?" "It's too tiring." "It's nothing," He Hung tightened his grasp. "Don't fuss, We're almost there. Jin will carry you back. Chu Qingju buried her head in his chest, muttering, so embarrassing. I've seen you in more embarrassing situations. He Hung laughed out loud, but it's true that you are much heavier now. Chu Qingju pinched at his waist, sniffing. Well, whose fault is that? My fault, my fault. He Hung continued to take large steps forward, not at all affected by Chu Qingju's pinch. Heavier is good, I like you heavier. The crowd of people following behind silently pushed their heads lowered. They expressed that they hadn't heard anything. Of course, they also didn't see the fawning act of the emperor as he tried to win favor with the empress. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.